A Dog's Heart. Mikhail Bulgakov. Chapter 1. Oh, look at me, I'm dying. The blizzard in the alley is roaring a dirge for me, and I'm howling with it. I'm done for, gone. The bastard in the filthy cap. The cook in the normalized nutrition canteen serving the Central Economic Council sloshed boiling water at me and burned my left side. What a creep and a proletarian to boot. Lord, God Almighty, it hurts. The boiling water ate through to the bone. So I howl and howl and howl, but how can howling help? What did I ever do to him? What? Did he think I'd eat the Economic Council out of its stores if I rummaged in the rubbish? Greedy creature. Take a look at his mug sometime. Fat, broad cheeks. He's a brass-faced thief. People, help! The white hat gave me a taste of boiling water at noon. Now it's dark, around 4 in the afternoon, going by the onion smell from the Prechestenka fire station. The firemen get buckwheat groats for dinner, as you well know. But that's way down on my list like mushrooms. Dogs I know from Prechestenka told me, however, that there's a place called the Bar on Neglany Street, where people gobble up the special of the day, mushrooms en sauce picante, at 3 rubles 75 a portion. To each his own. For me it's like licking galoshes. Ooh, my side is killing me, and I can see my future career absolutely clearly. Tomorrow there will be sores, and I'd like to know how I'm supposed to treat them. In the summer you can go down to Sokolniki Park, there's a particularly good grass there, and besides which you can stuff yourself with sausage ends and the citizenry litter the place with greasy wrapping paper that's good to lick. And if not for some old biddy who sings in the moonlight, Celeste Ida, in a way that turns your stomach, all would be fine. But now where am I supposed to go? Have you been kicked by boots? Yes. Have you ever got a brick in the ribs? Plenty of times. I've suffered it all. I've accepted my fate. And if I'm crying now it's only from the physical pain and the hunger, because my spirit hasn't dimmed yet. The canine spirit is very tenacious. But my body is broken, battered, people have had their fun with it. The worst part is this. Once he'd poured the boiling water on me, it ate through the fur, and now there's no protection for my left side. I could easily get pneumonia, and if I do, citizens, I will starve to death. When you have pneumonia, you're supposed to lie under the main stairs inside. And who's gonna run around the bins in search of food except me, a bedridden bachelor dog? If my lung is affected, I'll be crawling on my belly, weakened, and any guy with a stick can finish me off. And then the street cleaners with their badges will grab me by my legs and toss me into their cart. Of all the proletarians, street cleaners are the vilest scum. Human dregs, the lowest category. You get different kinds of cooks. Take the late Vlas from Prechestenka. How many lives he saved. The most important thing when you're sick is to get a bite. And there were times, the old hounds say, when Vlas would toss a bone and it would have an ounce of meat on it. May he rest in peace for being a real human being, the personal chef to the Count Tolstoys, and not from the Council of Normalized Nutrition. What they do in the name of normalized nutrition is beyond a dog's mind to understand. Those bastards use rotten corned beef to make cabbage soup, and the poor customers know nothing about it. They come, eat, guzzle it down. This little typist of the 9th rank earns 45 rubles, but, of course, her lover gives her fine cotton stockings. And how much she has to put up with for those fil-de-purse stockings. He doesn't just take her the usual way, he makes her do it French style. Real bastards, those French, just between you and me. Though they eat well, all washed down with red wine. Yes, so the little typist will come to eat there. She can't afford to go to the bar on 45 rubles. She doesn't have enough for the movies, and movies are the sole consolation for women. She shudders and winces but eats it. Just think, 40 kopecks for 2 courses, while both those courses don't even cost 15, because the manager steals the remaining 25 kopecks. And is this the kind of food she should be eating? The tip of her right lung has a spot, and she has women's troubles thanks to that French stuff. They docked her wages at work and fed her putrid meat at the canteen. There she is, running into the alley in her lover's stockings. Her feet are cold. The wind is blowing on her belly because her fur's like mine, and she wears cold undies, just a lacy appearance of underwear. Tatters for her lover. Let her try putting on flannel pants. He'll shout, "Why can't you be sexy? I'm sick and tired of my Matriona. Sick of her flannel underpants. My time has come. I'm a chairman now, and everything I embezzle goes to female flesh, chocolates, and bottles of a Brauderso. I spent my entire youth hungry. I'm done with that, and there is no afterlife. Pity her, I do. But I pity myself even more. That's not my egoism talking, oh no, but it's because we truly are in unequal conditions. At least she's warm at home. But what about me? Where can I go? Beaten? Scalded? Spat upon? Where can I go? Oh, here, boy. Sharik? Come on. Sharik. Why are you whining, poor thing? Did someone hurt you? Oof. The blizzard wind, that which rattled the gates and smacked the young lady on the ear with its broom. It lifted her skirt to her knees, revealing creamy stockings and a narrow strip of poorly laundered lace underwear, stifling her words and sweeping away the dog. My God, what terrible weather. Oof, and my stomach aches. That salted meat. When will it all end? Lowering her head, the young woman launched herself into the attack, breaking through the gates, and she was spun round and round, tossed and then twisted into a snowy funnel, before she vanished. The dog remained near the alley, suffering the pain of his mutilated side, pressed himself against the cold wall, held his breath and decided that he would never leave the spot again, that he would die right there. Despair overwhelmed him. He felt such bitterness and pain, such loneliness and fear, that tiny canine tears bubbled from his eyes and dried on the spot. His fur on the wounded side was all in shredded, frozen clumps, revealing vicious red burns. How stupid, nasty, and cruel were cooks. She called him Sharik. What the hell kind of Sharik was he? Sharik was a fluffball, a round, well-fed, dumb, oatmeal-eating son of pedigree parents, and he was a shaggy, bony, and scruffy stray, a homeless dog. But thanks for the kind thought. The door of the brightly lit shop across the road slammed, and a citizen appeared. A citizen, not a comrade, and probably a gentleman. As he came closer, it was clear he was a gentleman. Don't you think I judge by the overcoat? Nonsense. Lots of proles wear overcoats now too. Of course, not with collars like that, no way, but still you could get confused from a distance. But I judge by the eyes. You can't mistake them either near or far. Oh, eyes are a significant thing, like a barometer. You can see everything. Who has a vast desert in his heart, who can jab you in the ribs with the toe of his boot for no reason at all, and who is afraid of everything. There's such pleasure in nipping the last type in the calf. Afraid? So there. If you're afraid, you deserve it. The gentleman crossed the street confidently in the column of blowing snow and moved towards the gate. Yes, I could see everything about him. He wouldn't put away that putrid corned beef, and if anyone dared serve him some he would raise such a fuss and write to the papers saying, "They gave me Philip Filipovich rotten meat." Here he comes, closer and closer. This one eats well and doesn't steal. He won't kick you, but he's not afraid of anyone, and that's because he's never hungry. He is a gentleman who does intellectual labor, with a French pointy beard and a gray mustache, fluffy and dashing like French knights had, but the blizzard carries his smell and it's a bad one, hospital and cigar. What the hell brings him to the Central Economy Co-op? Now he's right there. What's he looking for? Oh, what could he want to buy in that crummy little store? Aren't the fancy stores on Okotny Ryad enough? What is it? Sausage. Mister, if you saw how they made that sausage you wouldn't go anywhere near the store. Give it to me. The dog mustered what little strength it had and madly crawled out from beneath the gate onto the pavement. The blizzard thundered like a rifle shot above him, billowing the huge letters on a canvas poster. Is rejuvenation possible? Of course it is. The smell rejuvenated me, got me up off my belly, raising fiery waves in my stomach that had been empty for 2 days. The smell vanquished the hospital, the heavenly fragrance of ground mare with garlic and pepper. I can smell it. I know he's got sausage in his right pocket. He's standing above me. Oh, master, look at me. I am dying. We've got slaves' hearts. A miserable fate. The dog crawled like a snake on its belly, streaming tears. Note the cook's work. But you're not going to give me any. Oh, I know rich people very well. Yet, essentially, what do you want it for? What do you want with rotten horse meat? You won't get poison like this anywhere except at the Moscow Agricultural Processing Trust. That's for sure. You had breakfast today, you world luminary, thanks to male sex glands. Oh, what is going on in this fair world? I guess it's too early to die, and despair is a sin. I have to lick his hands. There's nothing else left to do. The mysterious gentleman bent over the dog, the gold frames around his eyes glinting, and took a long white package out of his right pocket. Without taking off his brown gloves, he unwrapped the paper, which the storm immediately took away, and broke off a piece of sausage which was called Krakow Special, and gave the piece to the dog. Oh, what a selfless individual! Oh, Fweet, the gentleman whistled and added in a stern voice. Here, Sharik, Sharik, Sharik again. I've been baptized. Call me whatever you want. In return for your exceptional act. The dog instantly pulled off the casing, clamped onto the Krakow sausage with a slurp and gulped it down in a trice, and choked on the sausage and snow to the point of tears, because he had almost swallowed the string in his greed. More, I lick your hand, more. I kiss your trousers, my benefactor. Enough for now. The gentleman spoke in short bursts as if giving orders. He leant over Sharik, looked interrogatively into his eyes and unexpectedly ran his gloved hand intimately and gently over Sharik's belly. Aha, he said portentously. No collar. That's lovely. You're just the one I want. Follow me. He clicked his fingers. Fweet. Follow you? To the ends of the earth. You can kick me with your suede shoes and I won't say a word. Street lamps glowed all over Prechistenka. His side ached terribly, but Sharik sometimes forgot about it. Lost in one thought only, how not to lose in the crowd the miraculous vision in a fur coat, and how to express his love and loyalty. And he expressed it some 7 times down the length of Prechistenka to Obakov Lane. He kissed his shoe. Near Myrtvy Lane, trying to clear the path, he scared some lady with his wild bark so much that she sank down on an advertising pillar, and once or twice he whined to maintain the man's pity. Some bitch of a stray cat, looking like a Siberian, slipped out of a drain pipe, having caught the scent of the sausage despite the blizzard. Sharik almost lost his mind at the prospect that this rich weirdo who picked up wounded dogs in doorways would pick up this thief too, and he would have to share the processed meat. He snarled and bared his teeth at the cat, and the feline hissed like a hole-riddled water hose and climbed up the pipe to the 2nd floor. Grr arf, scat. You can't stock up enough from the processing center for all the freeloaders hanging around on Prechistenka. The gentleman appreciated the loyalty and right at the fire station, by the window that emitted the pleasant grumble of a French horn, rewarded the dog with a second piece about an ounce smaller. Silly man, luring me. Don't worry, I'm not going off on my own. I'll follow you wherever you go. Fweet, this way. Onto Obakov? By all means. We know this lane very well. Fweet, this way. With please, oh no, sorry. There's a doorman. There's nothing worse than a doorman. Much more dangerous than a street cleaner. An absolutely hateful breed. More disgusting than cats. A flayer in gold braid. Don't be afraid. Go. Good evening, Philip Filipovich. Hello, Fyodor. Now there's a personality for you. My God. What have you found for me? My dog's destiny. What kind of man is this who can bring dogs off the street past doormen into an apartment building run by a council of comrades? Look at that scoundrel. Not a word. Not a movement. His eyes look disturbed, but in general he is indifferent under his gold-braided cap. As if this is how things should be. That's respect, gentlemen. Real respect. Well, and I'm with him and behind him. What? Touch me. Here's a bite. I'd love to sink my teeth into your calloused proletarian foot. For all the torment from your brethren. How many times did you poke my face with a broom? Come on, come on. I got it, don't worry. Wherever you go, so do I. You just show me the way, and I'll keep up, despite my miserable side. Calling down from the stairs. Were there any letters for me, Fyodor? From below, respectfully. No, sir, Philip Filipovich, there weren't. Then, in an intimate, low tone, adding, They've moved new tenants into apartment 3. The important canine benefactor turned abruptly on the step, leant over the banister, and asked in horror, "Really?" His eyes opened wide and his mustache bristled. The doorman tilted his head, brought his hand to his mouth and confirmed it. "Yes, sir. A total of 4 of them. My God, I can just imagine the state of the apartment now. And what did they say? Nothing. And Fyodor Pavlovich? He went out for screens and bricks, to make partitions. I'll be damned. They'll be moving people into all the apartments, Philip Filipovich, except yours. There was a meeting. They elected a new council of comrades and sent the old one packing. The goings-on. Fweet. I'm on my way, hurrying. My side is making itself felt, you see. Allow me to lick your boot." The doorman's gold braid vanished below. The marble landing was warm from the pipes. We turned one more time and reached the first floor. Chapter 2. There's absolutely no reason to learn how to read when you can smell meat a mile away. Nevertheless, if you live in Moscow and you have a modicum of sense in your head, you learn some reading willy-nilly, and without taking any courses. Of the 40,000 Moscow dogs there must only be one total idiot who can't make out the word sausage syllable by syllable. Sharik started learning by color. He had just turned 4 months when they hung greenish-blue signs all over Moscow with the words, MSPO meat trade. We repeat, none of that is needed because you can smell meat anyway. And there was some confusion once. Going by the toxic blue color, Sharik, whose nose was masked by the petrol fumes of cars, ran into the Golubizner brothers' electrical goods shop on Myasnitskaya Street instead of a butcher shop. There, at the brothers' shop, the dog felt the sting of insulated wire, which is a lot tougher than a coachman's whip. That famous moment should be considered the start of Sharik's education. Back on the pavement, Sharik immediately understood that blue doesn't always mean meat, and, tucking his tail between his hind legs and howling with pain, he recalled that all the butcher's signs started on the left with a gold or reddish squat squiggle that looks like a sled. Things went more successfully after that. He learnt A from Glaverba, the fish store on the corner of Mokovaya, and then the B, because it was easier to run over from the tail end of the word for fish, Reba, since there always was a policeman standing at the beginning of the word. Tile squares on the facades of corners in Moscow always and inevitably meant cheese. The black tap of a samovar, the letters that started the word stood for the former owner Chichkin, mountains of Dutch red cheese, vicious salesmen who hated dogs, sawdust on the floor, and the most vile, stinky Backstein cheese. If someone was playing a concertina, which wasn't much better than Celeste Ida, and it smelt of hot dogs, the first letters on the white signs quite conveniently formed the word foul, which meant foul language not permitted and no tipping. Here brawls cycloned sporadically, people were punched in the face, albeit rarely, while dogs were beaten continually with napkins or boots. If the windows displayed leathery hanging hams and piles of mandarin oranges, it was a delicatessen. If there were dark bottles with a bad liquid, it was a woof-wow.w-any store. The former Yelisive brothers' store. The unknown gentleman, who had lured the dog to the door of his luxurious apartment on the 2nd floor, rang, and the dog looked up at the big card, black with gold letters, hanging to the side of the wide door with panes of wavy, rosy glass. He combined the first 3 letters right away, Poirot, pro. But then came a tubby, double-sided bitch of a letter that didn't stand for anything he knew. Could it be proletariat? Wondered Sharik doubtfully. That can't be. He raised his nose and sniffed the fur coat once again, and thought confidently, no, there's no smell of the proletariat here. It's a scholarly word, and God only knows what it means. Behind the rosy glass an unexpected and joyful light came on, casting the black card deeper into shadow. The door opened without a sound, and a pretty young woman in a white apron and lace cap appeared before dog and man. The former was enveloped in divine warmth, and the woman's skirt gave off the scent of lily of the valley. Now you're talking, this is it, thought the dog. Please enter, Mr. Sharik. The man invited sarcastically, and Sharik entered reverently, tail wag. A great number of objects cluttered the rich entrance. The floor-length mirror that instantly reflected the second bedraggled and scruffy Sharik, the scary antlers up high, the endless fur coats and rubber boots and the opal tulip with electricity on the ceiling, all stuck in his head immediately. "Where did you pick up this one, Philip Filipovich?" asked the woman with a smile and helped him remove his heavy coat, lined with dark brown fox with a bluish tinge. "Lord, what a mangy thing! Nonsense! Where is he mangy?" the gentleman asked severely and gruffly. Upon removing his fur coat, he appeared in a black suit of English cloth, and a gold chain twinkled happily and subtly across his belly. "Just wait, stop wriggling, fweet, stop twisting, silly. That's not mange. Will you stand still, damn you? Ah, it's a burn. What bastard scalded you? Stand still, will you? The cook, the criminal. The cook." The dog spoke with his piteous eyes and whined a bit. "Zina," ordered the man, "bring him to the examining room and me my coat." The woman whistled and clicked her fingers, and the dog, after a brief hesitation, followed her. Together they entered a narrow, dimly lit corridor, passed a lacquered door and came to the end, and then went left and ended up in a dark cubbyhole, which instantly displeased the dog by its evil smell. The darkness clicked and turned into blinding daylight, and it sparkled, lit up, and turned white from all sides. "Oh no!" the dog howled mentally. "Sorry, not for me. I get it. Damn them and their sausage. They've lured me into a dog hospital. They'll force me to eat castor oil and they'll cut up my side with knives. And it hurts too much to touch as it is. Hey, no. Where do you think you're going?" shouted the one called Zina. The dog twisted away, coiled up, and then hit the door with its healthy side so hard that the whole apartment shuddered. Then he flew back, spun around in place like a top, and knocked over a white bucket that scattered clumps of cotton wool. As he spun, walls flew by, fitted with cupboards of gleaming instruments, and the white apron and distorted female face jumped up. "Where are you going, you shaggy devil?" Zina shouted desperately. "Damn you! Where's the back stairs?" thought the dog. He reversed and smashed himself against the glass, hoping that it was a second door. A cloud of glass shards flew out with thunder and ringing. A tubby jar with reddish crap jumped out, spilling all over the floor and stinking up the room. The real door swung open. "Stop, be bastard!" the man shouted, jumping around in his white coat with only one sleeve on, and grabbed the dog by its legs. "Zina, hold him by the scruff of his neck, the scoundrel! Wow, what a dog!" The door opened even wider and another person of the male gender in a white coat burst in. Crushing broken glass, he rushed not towards the dog but the cupboard, opened it, and the whole room was filled with a sweet and nauseating odor. Then the person fell onto the dog with his belly, and the dog took pleasure in nipping him above the shoelaces. The person gasped but held on. The nauseating liquid filled the dog's breathing and everything in his head spun. Then he couldn't feel his legs and he slid off somewhere sideways, crookedly. "Thanks, it's over," he thought dreamily, falling right on the sharp pieces of glass. "Farewell, Moscow. I'll never see Chichkin and proletarians and Krakow sausages again. I'm going to heaven for my canine suffering. Fellows, knackers, why did you do me in?" And then he fell over on his side completely and croaked. When he was resurrected, his head spun lightly and he had a bit of nausea in his belly, but it was as if he had no side. His side was deliciously silent. The dog half opened his right eye and out of the corner saw that he was tightly bandaged across his sides and belly. They had their way after all, the sons of bitches, he thought woozily. But cleverly, you have to give them that. From Seville to Granada, in the quiet twilight of the nights, a distracted falsetto voice sang above him. The dog was surprised. He opened both eyes fully and saw 2 steps away from him a man's foot on a white stool. The trouser leg and long underpants were hiked up and the bare yellow shin was smeared with dried blood and iodine. "Saints alive!" thought the dog. "That must be where I bit him. My work. They'll whip me now." Serenades abound. Swords clash all around. "Why did you bite a doctor, you mutt? Why did you break the glass? Oh." The dog whimpered piteously. "Well, all right, you're conscious. So just lie there, you dummy. How did you manage to lure such a nervous dog, Philip Filipovich? Asked a pleasant male voice, and the knit underpants slid down. Tobacco smoke filled the air, and glass bottles rattled in the cupboard. With kindness. It's the only way possible in dealing with a living creature. Terror won't work at all with an animal, at whatever level of development it may be. I've said it before and I say it again and will continue saying it. They're wrong to think that terror will help them. No, it won't, whatever its color. White, red, or even brown. Terror paralyses the nervous system completely. Zina, I bought this wastrel a ruble and 40 kopecks worth of Krakow sausage. Be so kind as to feed him when he's no longer nauseated. Broken glass tinkled as it was swept up, and a woman's voice noted flirtatiously, Krakow sausage. God, you should have gotten him 2 kopecks worth of scraps at the butcher. I'll eat the Krakow sausage myself. Just try. I'll eat you. It's poison for the human stomach. A grown young woman and you're like a baby sticking all kinds of nasty things in your mouth. Don't you dare. I'm warning you. Neither Dr. Bormental nor I will bother with you when you get the runs. Everyone who says that another is your match. Soft staccato bells jingled throughout the apartment, and in the distance voices sounded frequently in the entrance. The telephone rang. Zina vanished. Philip Filipovich tossed his cigarette butt in the bucket, buttoned his coat, smoothed his luxurious mustache in the mirror on the wall and called the dog. Fweet, fweet. Come on, it's fine. Let's go receive. The dog got up on unsteady legs, swayed and trembled, but quickly got his bearings and followed the fluttering coattails of Philip Filipovich. Once again the dog crossed the narrow corridor, but now he saw that it was brightly lit from above. When the lacquered door opened, he followed Philip Filipovich into the office, which blinded the dog with its interior. First of all, it was blazing with light. It burned on the plaster-ornamented ceiling, it burned on the desk, it burned on the wall and in the cupboard glass. Light poured over a myriad of objects, of which the most amusing was an enormous owl, sitting on a branch on the wall. Stay, ordered Philip Filipovich. The carved door opposite opened and the bitten man came in, and now in the bright light revealed as a very handsome young fellow with a pointy beard, and handed over a piece of paper, muttering, The previous. He vanished silently, while Philip Filipovich smoothed the tails of his lab coat and sat behind the huge desk, thereby becoming incredibly important and imposing. No, this isn't a hospital. I've landed in some other place. The dog thought in confusion and flopped on the carpet by the heavy leather sofa. And we'll figure out that owl too. The door opened softly and someone came in, astonishing the dog enough to make him yap, but very diffidently. Quiet. Well, you're unrecognizable, dear fellow. The newcomer bowed very respectfully and awkwardly to Philip Filipovich. He, you are a magician and sorcerer, professor, he muttered in embarrassment. Take off your pants, dear fellow, Philip Filipovich commanded and stood up. Jesus, thought the dog. What a fruitcake. The fruitcake's head was covered with completely green hair, and at the back it had a rusty tobacco shimmer. Wrinkles spread out on the fruitcake's face, but his complexion was as pink as a baby's. His left leg couldn't bend and he had to drag it along the carpet, but the right one jerked like a toy nutcracker. On the lapel of his magnificent jacket, a precious stone protruded like an eye. The dog was so interested that his nausea passed. Yip, yip, he barked softly. Quiet. How are you sleeping, dear fellow? Are we alone, Professor? It's indescribable, the visitor said in embarrassment. Parole d'honneur. I've seen nothing like it for 25 years. The subject touched the button of his trousers. Can you believe it, Professor? Every night there are herds of naked girls. I am positively delighted. You are a sorcerer. Grunted Philip Filipovich in concern, peering into his guest's pupils. The latter had finally mastered the buttons and removed his striped trousers. Beneath them were unimaginable underpants. They were cream-colored, with embroidered black silk cats, and they smelt of perfume. The dog couldn't resist the cats and barked, making the subject jump. I'll whip you. Don't be afraid, he doesn't bite. I don't bite. The dog was surprised. A small envelope, with a picture of a beautiful girl with loosened tresses, fell out of the trousers pocket onto the floor. The subject jumped up, bent over, picked it up and blushed a deep red. You'd better watch it, Philip Filipovich warned grimly, wagging his finger. Do be careful not to abuse it. I'm not Abu. The subject muttered in embarrassment, still undressing. This was just an experiment, dear professor. Well, and what were the results? Philip Filipovich asked sternly. The subject waved his arm ecstatically. In 25 years, I swear to God, professor, there was nothing like it. The last time was in 1899 in Paris on the Rue de la Paix. And why have you turned green? The visitor's face darkened. That damned Zerkost. You cannot imagine what those useless louts fobbed off on me instead of die. Just look, he babbled, his eyes searching for a mirror. It's terrible. They should be punched in the face, he added, growing angrier. What I am supposed to do now, professor? He asked, sniveling. Shave it all off. Professor, the visitor exclaimed piteously. It will grow back gray again. Besides which, I won't be able to show my face at work. I've been out 3 days now as it is. The car comes for me and I send it away. Oh, professor, if you could discover a way of rejuvenating hair as well. Not right away, dear fellow, muttered Philip Filipovich. Bending over, he examined the patient's bare belly with glistening eyes. Well, it's lovely. Everything is perfectly fine. I didn't expect such a fine result, truth to tell. Lots of blood and lots of songs. Get dressed, dear fellow. And for the loveliest of all. The patient sang the next line in a voice as resonant as a frying pan and, glowing, started dressing. Having brought himself back to order, hopping and exuding perfume, he counted out a wad of white banknotes for Philip Filipovich and tenderly pressed both of his hands. You need not return for 2 weeks, Philip Filipovich said. But I do ask that you be careful. Professor! From beyond the door, in ecstasy, the guest exclaimed, Do not worry in the least. He giggled sweetly and vanished. The tinkling bell flew through the apartment. The lacquered door opened. The bitten one entered, handing Philip Filipovich a piece of paper and announced, The dates are incorrectly given. Probably 54 to 55. Heart tones low. He vanished and was replaced by a rustling lady with a hat at a rakish angle and a sparkling necklace on her flabby and wrinkled neck. Terrible black bags sagged beneath her eyes, but her cheeks were a doll's rouge color. She was very agitated. Madam, how old are you? Philip Filipovich asked very severely. The lady took flight and even paled beneath the crust of rouge. Professor, I swear, if you only knew my drama. How old, madam? Philip Filipovich repeated even more severely. Honestly, well, 45 dash. Madam, Philip Filipovich cried out. People are waiting. Don't hold me up, please, you are not the only one. The lady's bosom heaved mightily. I'll tell you alone, as a luminary of science. But I swear, it is so terrible dash. How old are you? Philip Filipovich demanded angrily and squeakily, and his glasses flashed. 51, the lady replied, cowering in fear. Take off your pants, madam, Philip Filipovich said in relief and indicated a tall white scaffold in the corner. I swear, professor, the lady muttered, undoing some snaps on her belt with trembling fingers. That Moritz, I am confessing to you, hiding nothing. From Seville to Granada, Philip Filipovich sang distractedly and stepped on the pedal under the marble sink. Water poured noisily. I swear to God, the lady said, and live spots of color broke through the artificial ones on her cheeks. I know that this is my last passion. He's such a scoundrel. Oh, professor, he's a card shark, all of Moscow knows it. He can't let a single lousy model get by. He's so devilishly young. The lady mumbled and pulled out a crumpled lacy clump from beneath her rustling skirts. The dog was completely confused and everything went belly up in his head. The hell with you, he thought dimly, resting his head on his paws and falling asleep from the shame. I won't even try to understand what this is, since I won't get it anyway. He was awaked by a ringing sound and saw that Philip Filipovich had tossed some glowing tubes into a basin. The spotted lady, pressing her hands to her breast, gazed hopefully at Philip Filipovich. He frowned importantly and, sitting at his desk, made a notation. "Madam, I will transplant ape ovaries in you," he announced and looked severe. "Ah, Professor, must it be an ape?" "Yes," Philip Filipovich replied inexorably. "When will the operation take place?" the lady asked in a weak voice, turning pale. "From Seville to Granada, Monday. You will check into the clinic in the morning and my assistant will prepare you." "Ah, I don't want to be in the clinic." "Can't you do it here, Professor?" "You see, I do surgery here only in extreme situations. It will be very expensive, 5,000. "I'm willing, Professor." The water thundered again, the feathered hat billowed, and then a head as bald as a plate appeared and embraced Philip Filipovich. The dog dozed, the nausea had passed, and the dog enjoyed the calm side and warmth, even snored a little and had time for a bit of a pleasant dream. He had torn a whole bunch of feathers from the owl's tail. Then an agitated voice bleated overhead. "I am a well-known figure, Professor. What do I do now?" "Gentlemen," Philip Filipovich shouted in outrage. "You can't behave this way. You have to control yourself." "How old is she?" 14, Professor. "You realize that the publicity will destroy me. I'm supposed to be sent to London on business any day now. I'm not a lawyer, dear fellow. So wait 2 years and marry her." "I'm married, Professor." "Ah, gentlemen. Doors opened. Faces changed. Instruments clattered in the cupboard. And Philip Filipovich worked without stop. A vile apartment, the dog thought. But how good it is here. What the hell did he need me for? Is he really going to let me live? What a weirdo. A single wink from him and he'd get such a fine dog it would take your breath away. Maybe I'm handsome too. It's my good luck. But the owl is garbage. Arrogant. The dog woke up at last late in the evening, when the bell stopped and just at the instant when the door let in special visitors. There were 4 at once. All young people and all dressed very modestly. What do these want? The dog thought with surprise. Philip Filipovich greeted them with much greater hostility. He stood at his desk and regarded them like a general looking at the enemy. The nostrils of his aquiline nose flared. The arrivals shuffled their feet on the carpet. "We are here, Professor," said the one with a topknot of about a half-foot of thick, curly black hair. "On this matter dash, gentlemen, you shouldn't go around without galoshes in this weather." Philip Filipovich interrupted edifyingly. "First, you will catch cold, and second, you've left tracks on my carpets, and all my carpets are Persian." The one with the topknot shut up and all 4 stared in astonishment at Philip Filipovich. The silence extended to several seconds, and it was broken by Philip Filipovich's fingers drumming on the painted wooden plate on his desk. "First of all, we're not gentlemen," said the youngest of the 4, who had a peachy look. "First of all," interrupting him as well, Philip Filipovich asked, "Are you a man or a woman?" The 4 shut up and gaped once again. This time the first one, with the hair, responded. "What difference does it make, comrade?" he asked haughtily. "I'm a woman," admitted the peachy youth in the leather jacket and blushed mightily. After him, one of the other arrivals, a blond man in a tall fur hat, blushed dark red for some reason. "In that case, you may keep your cap on. But you, gracious sir, I ask to remove your headgear," Philip Filipovich said imposingly. "I'm not your gracious sir," the blond youth muttered in embarrassment, removing his hat. "We have come to you dash," the dark-haired one began again. "First of all, who is this we?" "We are the new managing board of our building," the dark one said with contained fury. "I am Shvander, she is Vyazemskia, he is Comrade Pastrukin and Sharovkin. And so we dash. You're the ones who have been moved into the apartment of Fyodor Pavlovich Sablin?" "We are," Shvander replied. "God, the Kalabukov house is doomed," Philip Filipovich exclaimed in despair and threw his hands up in the air. "What are you laughing about, Professor?" "I'm not laughing. I'm in complete despair," shouted Philip Filipovich. What will happen to the central heating now? You are mocking us, Professor Preobrazhensky. What business brings you here? Make it fast. I'm on my way to dinner. We, the building committee, Schwander said with hatred, have come to you after the general meeting of the residents of our building, on the agenda of which was the question of consolidating the apartments. Where was this agenda? Screamed Philip Filipovich. Make an effort to express your ideas more clearly. The question of consolidating dash. Enough. I understand. You know that by the resolution of August 12th of this year my apartment is exempt from all and any consolidation and resettlement. We know, Schwander replied. But the general meeting examined your case and came to the conclusion that in particular and on the whole you occupy an excessive space. Completely excessive. You live alone in 7 rooms. I live and work alone in 7 rooms, replied Philip Filipovich. And I would like to have an 8th. I need it as a library. The foursome froze. An 8th. Ho ho ho, said the blond man deprived of his headgear. That's really something. It's indescribable, explained the youth who turned out to be a girl. I have a reception note that it is also the library, a dining room and my study. That's 3. Examining room. 4. Operating room. 5. My bedroom makes 6. And the maid's room is 7. Basically, it's not enough. But that's not important. My apartment is exempt and that's the end of the conversation. May I go to dinner? Sorry, said the 4th, who looked like a sturdy beetle. Sorry, Schwander interrupted. It is precisely the dining room and examining room that we came to discuss. The general meeting asks you voluntarily, as part of labor discipline, to give up the dining room. No one has dining rooms in Moscow anymore. Not even Isadora Duncan, the woman cried out resoundingly. Something happened to Philip Filipovich, the consequence of which was a gentle reddening of the face. But he did not utter a sound, waiting for what would come next. And the examining room too, Schwander continued. The examining room can easily be combined with the study. Aha, said Philip Filipovich in a strange voice. And where am I supposed to partake of meals? In the bedroom, all 4 chorused. Philip Filipovich's crimson color took on a grayish cast. Take food in the bedroom, he said in a slightly stifled voice. Read in the examining room, dress in the reception room, operate in the maid's room, and examine people in the dining room? It's quite possible that Isadora Duncan does just that. Maybe she dines in the study and cuts up rabbits in the bathroom. Perhaps. But I am not Isadora Duncan, he burst out, and his purple color turned yellow. I will eat in the dining room and operate in the operating room. Tell this to the general meeting, and I entreat you humbly to return to your affairs and allow me to take food where all normal people do, that is, in the dining room, and not in the entrance and not in the nursery. Then, Professor, in view of your stubborn resistance, said agitated Schwander, we will file a complaint against you higher up. Aha, Philip Filipovich said. Is that so? His voice took on a suspiciously polite tone. I'll ask you to wait a minute. That's some guy, thought the dog delightedly. Just like me. Oh, he's gonna nip them now. Oh, he will. I don't know how yet, but he'll nip them. Hit them. Take that long-legged one right above the boot on his knee tendon. Grrr. Philip Filipovich picked up the telephone receiver with a bang and said this into it. Please. Yes. Thank you. Vitaly Alexandrovich, please. Professor Preobrazhensky. Vitaly Alexandrovich? Very glad to find you in. Thank you, I'm fine. Vitaly Alexandrovich, your operation is being cancelled. What? No, cancelled completely, just like all the other operations. Here is why. I am stopping work in Moscow and in Russia in general. 4 people just came in to see me. One of them is a woman dressed as a man and 2 are armed with revolvers, and they terrorized me in my apartment with the goal of taking part of it away. Excuse me, Professor. Schwander began, his expression changed. Sorry. I do not have the opportunity to repeat everything they said. I'm not interested in nonsense. It is enough to say that they proposed I give up my examining room, in other words, making it necessary to operate on you where I have been slaughtering rabbits until now. In such conditions I not only cannot work, but I do not have the right to work. Therefore, I am ending my activity, closing up the apartment, and moving to Sochi. I can turn over the keys to Shvander. Let him perform the operations. The foursome froze. Snow melted on their boots. What else can I do? I'm very unhappy about it myself. What? Oh no, Vitaly Alexandrovich. Oh no. I will not continue this way. My patience has run out. This is the second time since August. What? Chem? As you wish. But at least. But only on this condition. From whomever, whenever, whatever. But it must be a paper that will keep Shvander and everyone else from even approaching the door to my apartment. A final paper. Factual. Real. A seal. So that my name is not even mentioned. Of course. I am dead to them. Yes, yes. Please. Who? Aha. Well, that's better. Aha. All right. I'll pass the phone over. Please be so kind. Philip Filipovich said in a snake-like voice. Someone wants to speak to you. Excuse me, Professor. Shvander said, flaring up and then fading. You perverted our words. I will ask you not to use such expressions. Shvander distractedly took the receiver and said, I'm listening. Yes, Chairman of the Buildcom. We were acting in accordance with the rules. The professor is in a completely exceptional situation as it is. We know about his work. We were going to leave an entire 5 rooms. Well, all right, if that's the case. All right. Completely red. He hung up and turned. He really showed him. What a guy! The dog thought in delight. Does he know some special word? You can beat me all you like now, but I'm not ever leaving here. 3 of them, mouths agape, stared at the humiliated Shvander. This is shameful, he muttered diffidently. If we were to have a discussion now, the woman began, excited and with flaming cheeks, I would prove to Vitaly Alexandrovich. Forgive me. You're not planning to open the discussion this minute, are you? Philip Filipovich asked politely. The woman's eyes burned. I understand your irony, Professor. We will be leaving. Only, as chairman of the cultural section of the building dash. Chairwoman, Philip Filipovich corrected. I want to ask you, and here the woman pulled out several bright and snow-sodden magazines from inside her coat. To buy a few magazines to help the children of France. ½ ruble each. No, I won't, Philip Filipovich replied brusquely, squinting at the magazines. Total astonishment showed on their faces, and the woman's complexion took on a cranberry hue. Why are you refusing? I don't want to. Don't you feel sympathy for the children of France? I do. Do you begrudge the 50 kopecks? No. Then why? I don't want to. A silence ensued. You know, Professor, said the girl after a deep sigh, if you weren't a European luminary and you weren't protected in the most outrageous manner, the blonde man tugged at the hem of her jacket, but she waved him off, by people whom, I am certain we will discover you should be arrested. For what exactly? Philip Filipovich asked with curiosity. You hate the proletariat, the woman said hotly. Yes, I don't like the proletariat. Philip Filipovich agreed sadly and pressed a button. A bell rang somewhere. The door to the hallway opened. Zina, Philip Filipovich shouted. Serve dinner. Do you mind, gentlemen? The foursome silently left the study, silently went through the reception, silently through the entrance, and behind them came the sound of the front door shutting heavily and resoundingly. The dog stood on his hind legs and performed a kind of prayer dance before Philip Filipovich. Chapter 3. The dishes, painted with paradisiacal flowers and a wide black rim, held thin slices of salmon and marinated eel. On the heavy board was a chunk of sweating cheese, and in a silver bowl surrounded by snow was caviar. Among the plates stood several slender shot glasses and 3 crystal decanters with vodkas of different colors. All these objects resided on a small marble table cozily nestled up against the enormous carved oak sideboard, erupting with bursts of glass and silver light. In the center of the room stood a table, as heavy as a gravestone, under a white cloth, and on it were 2 settings, napkins folded into bishop's mitres and 3 dark bottles. Zina brought in a covered silver dish with something grumbling inside. The fragrance coming from the dish made the dog's mouth fill with watery saliva instantly. The gardens of Semiramide, he thought, and started banging his tail like a stick on the parquet floor. "Bring them here," Philip Filipovich commanded with the air of a predator. "Dr. Bormental, I tell you, leave the caviar be. If you would like to take some good advice, have the ordinary Russian vodka, not the English." The handsome bitten one, he was no longer wearing the lab coat but was in a decent black suit, shrugged his broad shoulders, chuckled politely, and poured himself the clear vodka. "The newly blessed?" he inquired. "Bless you, dear fellow," the host replied. "It's spirit alcohol. Darya Petrovna makes excellent vodka herself. You know, Philip Filipovich, everyone says that it's quite decent now. 60 proof. But vodka must be 80 proof, not 60, first of all," Philip Filipovich interrupted with a lecture. "And secondly, God only knows what they may have added to it. Can you predict what they could come up with?" "Anything at all," the bitten one said confidently. "I am of the same opinion," added Philip Filipovich, and tossed the contents of his glass as a single lump into his throat. Dr. Bormental, I entreat you. Take this thing instantly, and if you say it's not, then I will be your mortal enemy for life. From Seville to Granada." With those words, he hooked something resembling a small dark loaf of bread on his palmate's silver fork. The bitten one followed his example. Philip Filipovich's eyes glowed. "Is this bad?" Philip Filipovich asked, chewing. "Is it? You tell me, esteemed doctor." "It's exquisite," the bitten one replied sincerely. "Of course. Please note, Ivan Arnoldovich, that only the remaining landowners not yet slaughtered by the Bolsheviks use cold hors d'oeuvres or soup as zakouski for vodka. Any even slightly self-respecting person operates with hot zakouski. And of the hot zakouski of Moscow, this is number 1. They used to be prepared marvelously once upon a time at the Slavyansky Bazaar. "Here, you're giving the dog food from the table," a woman's voice sounded. "And then you won't be able to lure him out of here with a fresh-baked round loaf. It's all right. The poor thing was starved." Philip Filipovich used his fork to serve the dog the titbit, which was accepted with prestidigitatorial agility, and then tossed the fork with a clatter into the rinse bowl. Next, steam redolent of crayfish rose from the plates. The dog sat in the shade of the tablecloth with the air of a watchman at a gunpowder warehouse, while Philip Filipovich tucked the tail of the taut napkin into his collar and preached. "Food, Ivan Arnoldovich, is a tricky thing. One must know how to eat, and just imagine the majority of people don't know how at all. One needs to know not only what to eat, but when and how." Philip Filipovich waved his spoon significantly. "And what to say, yes. If you care about your digestion, here is good advice. Do not talk about Bolshevism or medicine while eating. And, God forbid, don't read Soviet newspapers before dinner. But there are no others. So don't read any. You know, I did 30 observations at my clinic. And what do you think? The patients who did not read newspapers felt wonderful. The ones I had read Pravda lost weight." The bitten one responded with interest, turning pink with soup and wine. "Moreover, reduced knee reflexes, poor appetite and depression." "The devil!" "Yes, but what am I doing? I brought up medicine myself. Let's eat instead." Philip Filipovich leant back, rang, and Zina appeared in the cherrywood doorway. The dog was given a pale and fat piece of sturgeon, which he didn't like, and immediately after it a piece of rare roast beef. Gobbling it down, the dog suddenly realized that he was sleepy and couldn't look at any more food. A strange sensation, he thought, shutting his heavy lids. My eyes don't want to see any food, and smoking after dinner is stupid. The dining room filled with unpleasant blue cigar smoke. The dog dozed, head on top of his front paws. St. Julian is a decent wine, the dog heard in his sleep, but you can't get it any more. A soft chorale, dampened by ceilings and carpets, reached them from above and the side. Philip Filipovich rang and Zina entered. "Zanusha, what does this mean?" "They're having a general meeting again, Philip Filipovich," Zina replied. "Again?" Philip Filipovich cried bitterly. "Well, that's the beginning of the end. The Kalabukov house is doomed. I'll have to move. But where, I ask you? It's a slippery slope." First there will be singing every night, then the pipes will freeze in the toilets, then the boiler will burst in the central heating system, and so on. It's curtains for Kalabukov. Philip Filipovich is grieving, Zina noted with a smile and carried away a mound of dishes. How could I not grieve? Howled Philip Filipovich. What a building this was! You must understand. You take too grim a view of things, Philip Filipovich, countered the handsome bitten one. They have changed acutely now. Dear fellow, you know me, right? I am a man of facts, a man of observation. I am an enemy of unsubstantiated hypotheses. And that is very well known not only in Russia but in Europe. If I say something, that means it is based on a fact from which I draw my conclusion. And here is a fact for you. The coat rack and galoshes stand in our building. Interesting. Galoshes, that's nonsense. Happiness does not lie in galoshes, thought the dog. But he's an outstanding character. Let me put it to you, the galoshes stand. I have lived in this building since 1903. And throughout that time until April 1917 there has not been a single incident, and I underline not a single in red pencil, of even one pair of galoshes disappearing from our lobby downstairs, with the front door never locked. Note that there are 12 apartments here and I have visiting hours. In April 1917, one fine day all the galoshes disappeared, including 2 pairs belonging to me, 3 walking sticks, an overcoat and the doorman's samovar. Ever since then the galoshes stand ceased to exist. My dear fellow, I'm not talking about the central heating. I'm not. Let it be. If we're in a social revolution, there shouldn't be heating. Though someday, if I have the free time, I'll study the brain and prove that all this social twaddle is nothing but delirium. So I say, why? When this whole business began, did everyone start walking in dirty galoshes and felt boots on the marble stairs? Why must the galoshes still be locked up and have a soldier posted to keep them from being swiped? Why did they remove the carpeting from the main staircase? Does Karl Marx forbid carpets on the stairs? Is it written anywhere in Karl Marx that the second entrance of the Kalabukov house on Prechestenka must be boarded up and people have to go around through the back door? Who needs that? The oppressed Negroes? Or the Portuguese workers? Why can't the proletariat leave its galoshes downstairs instead of dirtying the marble? But it doesn't even have any galoshes, Philip Filipovich, the bitten one tried to say. Nothing of the sort. Philip Filipovich replied in thunderous tones and poured a glass of wine. I don't approve of liqueurs after dinner. They weigh you down and have a deleterious effect on the liver. Nothing of the sort. The proletariat has galoshes, and those galoshes are mine. They are the very same galoshes that disappeared on April 13th, 1917. I ask you who swiped them. I? Impossible. The bourgeois Sablin. Philip Filipovich pointed at the ceiling. Ridiculous to contemplate. The sugar plant owner Polozov. Philip Filipovich pointed to the side. Not in any case. It was done by those songsters. Yes. But why can't they take them off when they're on the stairs? Philip Filipovich was turning purple. Why the hell did they remove the flowers from the landings? Why does the electricity, which, God help my memory here, went out twice in 20 years, now dim every single month? Dr. Bormental, statistics are a cruel thing. You, who are familiar with my latest work, know this better than anyone. It's the ruination, Philip Filipovich. No, Philip Filipovich countered with complete confidence. No, it's not. You be the first, dear Ivan Arnoldovich, to refrain from using that word. It's a mirage, smoke, fiction. Philip Filipovich spread his stubby fingers, making 2 shadows resembling tortoises wriggle on the tablecloth. What is this ruination of yours? An old hag with a crutch? A witch who smashed out all the window glass and put out all the lamps? She simply doesn't exist. What do you mean by that word? Philip Filipovich demanded angrily from the poor cardboard duck hanging upside down near the buffet, and answered for it. Here's what it is. If I, instead of operating every evening, start singing in chorus in my apartment, ruination will befall me. If I start, forgive me for saying this, start missing the toilet bowl when I piss, and so do Zina and Darya Petrovna, there will be ruination in the toilet. Therefore, ruination is not in the toilets. It's in people's heads. That means, when those baritones shout, "Beat the ruination," I laugh. Philip Filipovich's face contorted so much that the bitten one gaped. I swear, it makes me laugh. It means that every one of them should smack himself on the head. And then, when he beats the world revolution, Engels and Nikolai Romanov, the oppressed Malayans and other such hallucinations out of his head and starts cleaning out the sheds, his actual job of the ruin will vanish on its own. You cannot serve two gods at once. It is impossible simultaneously to sweep the trolley tracks and save some Spanish beggars. No one can manage that, doctor, and especially not people who are already 200 years behind the Europeans in development and still can't button their own trousers very effectively. Philip Filipovich had fallen into a rage. His hawk-like nostrils flared. Strengthened by his full dinner, he thundered like an ancient prophet, and his head sparked silver. His words fell on the sleepy dog like a quiet underground buzz. Sometimes the owl with the stupid yellow eyes flashed in his dreamy visions. Then the vile mug of the executioner in the dirty white cap. Then Philip Filipovich's cavalier's mustache, lit by the harsh electricity from the lampshade. Then sleepy sleighs creaked and vanished, while the ravaged piece of roast beef cooked in juices in the dog's stomach. He could earn money at rallies, the dog dreamt woozily. A first-class businessman. Of course, he doesn't seem to be short of funds as it is. Police! Shouted Philip Filipovich. Police! Glug glug glug. Bubbles burst in the dog's brain. Police! That and only that. It matters not at all whether he has a badge or a red kepi. Put a policeman next to every person and force that policeman to moderate the vocal outbursts of our citizens. You say, ruination. I will tell you, doctor, that nothing will change for the better in our building, or in any other building until you quieten those singers. As soon as they stop their concerts, the situation will improve on its own. You are making counter-revolutionary statements, Philip Filipovich, joked the bitten one. Pray God no one hears you. Nothing dangerous, Philip Filipovich retorted heatedly. No counter-revolution. By the way, there's another word I absolutely can't stand. There's no way of knowing what's hidden by it. The devil only knows. So I say, there is nothing counter-revolutionary in my words. There is only common sense and life experience. Here Philip Filipovich moved the tail of the shiny, cracked napkin from his collar, crumpled it up and laid it next to the unfinished glass of red wine. The bitten one immediately stood and thanked him. Merci. Just a minute, doctor. Philip Filipovich stopped him and took out his wallet from his pocket. He squinted, counted out white notes and handed them to the bitten one with the words, Today you are owed 40 rubles, Ivan Arnoldovich. Here you are. The man who suffered the dog bite thanked him and, blushing, stuffed the money into his jacket pocket. Will you be needing me this evening, Philip Filipovich? He inquired. No, thank you, dear fellow. We won't be doing anything today. First of all, the rabbit died, and secondly, they're doing Ida at the Bolshoi. I haven't heard it in a long time. I love it. Remember the duet? Tara, are rim. How do you find time for everything, Philip Filipovich? The doctor asked respectfully. He who never hurries always arrives everywhere on time, explained his host. Of course, if I were to jump around to various meetings and warble like a nightingale all day instead of doing my actual work, I wouldn't have time to go anywhere. Philip Filipovich's fingers pressed the button on his watch and the heavenly chimes played in his pocket. Just after 8. I'll get there for the second act. I am a believer in the division of labor. Let them sing at the Bolshoi and I'll do surgery. That's fine. And no ruination. Now, Ivan Arnoldovich, keep an eye out. As soon as there is a suitable death, straight from the table into a nutrient liquid and bring it to me. Don't worry, Philip Filipovich, the pathology anatomists have promised me. Excellent, and in the meantime we'll observe the street neurasthenic. Give him a good wash. Let his side heal. He's concerned about me, thought the dog. A very good man. I know who he is. He is a good wizard. A witch and magician from a canine fairy tale. This can't be just a dream, can it? What if it is? The dog shuddered in his sleep. I'll wake up and there won't be anything here. No lamp in silks, no warmth, no satiety. Back to the alley, horrible blizzard, icy asphalt, hunger, mean people, the cafeteria, the snow. God, how hard that will be. Chapter 4. But none of that happened. It was the alley that melted like a bad dream and did not return. You could see that the ruination was not so terrible. Despite it, twice a day the gray accordions under the windowsill filled with heat, and warmth spread in waves throughout the apartment. It was perfectly clear. The dog had got the top prize ticket in the canine lottery. His eyes now filled with grateful tears addressed to the wise man of Prechestenka at least twice a day. Besides which, all the cheval glass in the living room, in the reception area between the wardrobes reflected the lucky and handsome dog. I am handsome, perhaps an unknown canine prince incognito, pondered the dog, looking at the shaggy coffee-colored dog with a satisfied mug strolling in the mirrored distance. It's quite possible that my grandmother had a fling with a Newfoundland. I see that there is a white spot on my face. Where did it come from, you may ask? Philip Filipovich is a man of great taste, and he wouldn't pick up any old stray dog he came across. In the course of a week, the dog ate as much as he had in the last 6 hungry weeks on the streets. But that was only in terms of weight. There was no need to talk about the quality of the food at Philip Filipovich's. Even if you don't count the mountain of scraps Darya Petrovna bought every day at the market for 18 kopecks, it's enough to mention the dinners at 7 p.m. in the dining room which the dog attended, despite the protests of the graceful Zina. During these dinners, Philip Filipovich completely attained the calling of divinity. The dog stood on his hind legs and chewed his jacket. The dog learnt Philip Filipovich's ring, 2 full-voiced bursts of the master's push, and flew out barking to greet him in the entrance. The master strode in wearing the dark brown fox, glistening with a million snowflakes, smelling of tangerines, cigars, perfume, lemons, petrol, eau de cologne, cloth, and his voice, like a commanding trumpet, carried throughout the residence. You pig! Why did you tear apart the owl? Was it bothering you? Was it, I ask you? Why did you break Professor Mechnikov? He needs to be whipped, Philip Filipovich, at least once, Zina said in outrage, or he'll be thoroughly spoilt. Just look what he did to your galoshes. No one should be whipped, Philip Filipovich said agitatedly. Remember that once and for all. Humans and animals can be influenced only by suggestion. Did you give him meat today? Lord, he's eaten us out of house and home. How can you ask, Philip Filipovich? I'm amazed that he doesn't burst. Let him eat to his heart's content. How did the owl bother you? You hooligan. Oh, whined the toadying dog, crawling on his belly, legs twisted out. Then he was dragged by the scruff of his neck through the reception to the study with great hue and cry. The dog howled, snapped, clawed at the rug and rode on his backside, like in the circus. In the middle of the study on the rug lay the glass-eyed owl, its torn belly spilling red rags smelling of camphor. A shattered portrait smithereens were scattered on the desk. I left it like this on purpose so that you could enjoy the sight, an upset Zina reported. He jumped up on the desk, what a scoundrel, and grabbed the owl by the tail, snap. He tore it up before I caught my breath. Rub his nose in the owl, Philip Filipovich, so he knows not to ruin things. And the howling began. They dragged the dog, glued to the rug, to rub his nose in the owl, while the dog wept bitter tears and thought, beat me, just don't chase me from the apartment. Send the owl to the taxidermist today. Besides that, here is 8 rubles plus 15 kopecks for the tram. Go to Muir's and buy him a good collar with a chain. The next day they put a wide, shiny collar on the dog. At first, when he looked in the mirror, he was very upset, tucked in his tail and went to the bathroom, wondering how to tear it off against a trunk or a box. But very quickly the dog realized that he was a fool. Zina took him for a walk on the chain. On Obakov Lane the dog walked like a prisoner, burning with shame, but having walked along Prechestenka to the Church of Christ the Savior, he realized full well what a collar means in life. Wild envy burned in the eyes of every dog they encountered, and near Meyertvy Lane some long-limbed stray with a bobtail barked and cursed him as aristocratic scum and a suck-up. When they crossed the trolley tracks, the policeman regarded his collar with pleasure and respect, and when they returned, the most amazing thing in his life occurred. Fyodor the doorman personally unlocked the front door and let in Sharik, saying to Zina, "What a shaggy dog Philip Filipovich has, and astonishingly fat. And how? He eats for 6, explained Zina, made rosy and beautiful by the frost. A collar is like a briefcase, thought the dog wittily and, wagging his behind, sashayed up to the 2nd floor like an aristocrat. Now appreciating the collar's value, the dog made his first visit to the main department of paradise, from which he had been categorically banned until now, to wit, the kingdom of the cook, Darya Petrovna. The entire apartment wasn't worth 2 bits of Darya's kingdom. Every day, flames sparked and roared in the stove, black on top and tiled. The stove crackled. Darya Petrovna's face burned with eternally fiery torment and unquenched passion in the crimson columns. It shone and glistened with fat. 22 artificial diamonds glowed in her fashionably done light hair, combed over her ears and caught in a bun at the nape. Golden pots hung from hooks on the walls. The entire kitchen was a racket of smells, gurgling and hissing in closed vessels. "Out!" shrieked Darya Petrovna. "Out, you homeless pickpocket! You're the last thing I need in here. I'll take the poker to you dash. Now. Why are you barking at me?" The dog squinted sweetly. "I'm no pickpocket. Can't you see my collar?" He pushed at the door with his side, poking his nose through it. Sharik the dog had some secret in conquering people's hearts. 2 days later, he was lying next to the coal basket and watching Darya Petrovna work. She used a sharp, narrow knife to chop off the heads and feet of helpless grouse, and then like a furious executioner she tore flesh from the bones, pulled entrails out of the hens and twirled something in the meat grinder. At the same time, Sharik tore at a grouse head. Darya Petrovna pulled out pieces of soaked bread from a bowl of milk, mixed them with the ground meat on a board, poured cream over it all, salted it and shaped patties on the same board. The burner roared as if there was a house fire, and inside the skillet things burbled, bubbled and skittered. The damper leapt up with a clang revealing a horrible hell. Spurting, gushing. In the evening, the stone jaws went dim, and the dark and important Prechestenka night with its lone star showed in the kitchen window above the white half-curtain. In the kitchen, the floor was damp, the pots glowed mysteriously and dully, and a fireman's cap lay on the table. Sharik lay on the warm stove like a lion on the gates and, one ear cocked in curiosity, watched the black-mustachioed and excited man wearing a broad leather belt behind the half-shut door to Zina and Darya Petrovna's room embrace Darya Petrovna. Her face burned with torment and passion, all of it except her cadaverous powdered nose. A crack of light lay on a picture of the black-mustachioed man, and an Easter rose hung down from it. "You're as persistent as a demon," Darya Petrovna muttered in the semi-darkness. "Stop it. Zina will be back any minute." "Really? Did you get the rejuvenation treatment too?" "We don't need it," the man with the black mustache replied in a husky voice, barely able to control himself. "You are so fiery." In the evenings, the Prechestenka star was hidden behind heavy drapes, and if there was no performance of Ida at the Bolshoi and there was no meeting of the All-Russian Surgical Society, the god settled into an armchair. There were no lights on the ceiling, and only a single green lamp burned on the desk. Sharik lay on the carpet in the shadows and stared at the horrible business. Human brains lay in a disgustingly toxic and murky liquid in glass jars. The god's hands, bare to the elbow, were covered in reddish rubber gloves, and his slippery dull fingers rummaged in the grooves. Sometimes the god armed himself with a small glinting knife and quietly cut the firm yellow brains. "To the sacred banks of the Nile," sang the god softly, biting his lips and recalling the golden interior of the Bolshoi theater. The pipes were heated to the highest point at that hour. Their warmth rose to the ceiling, spreading from there throughout the room, and in the dog's fur the last flea, as yet not combed out by Philip Filipovich but already doomed, grew animated. And then the front door shut in the distance. "Zinka's off to the cinema," thought the dog. "And when she returns, we'll have supper." I think there will be veal cutlets for supper. On that terrible day, in the morning, Sharik was pricked by a premonition. As a result, he suddenly grew morose and ate breakfast, half a cup of oatmeal and yesterday's lamb bone, without any appetite. He moped to the reception and howled lightly at his own reflection. But after Zina took him for a walk on the boulevard, the day went normally. There were no office hours today because, as you know, there are no office hours on Tuesdays, and the god sat in the study, some heavy books with bright pictures spread on his desk. They waited for lunch. The dog perked up at the thought that the third dish today, as he had definitely learnt in the kitchen, would be turkey. Walking down the corridor, the dog heard the telephone ring unpleasantly and unexpectedly in Philip Filipovich's study. Philip Filipovich answered, listened, and suddenly grew agitated. "Excellent," said his voice. "Bring him right away, immediately." He moved about, rang, and told Zina when she came in to serve lunch quickly. Lunch, lunch, lunch. Dishes clattered in the dining room. Zina started rushing about. Darya Petrovna could be heard grumbling in the kitchen that the turkey wasn't done. The dog grew worried again. "I don't like a hubbub in the apartment," he thought. No sooner had he thought it than the hubbub took on an even more unpleasant character. Primarily due to the appearance of Dr. Bormental, whom he had once bitten. He brought a bad-smelling suitcase and, without even taking off his coat, rushed off with it down the corridor to the examining room. Philip Filipovich dropped his unfinished cup of coffee, which never happened, and ran to meet Bormental, which never happened with him either. "When did he die?" he shouted. 3 hours ago," Bormental replied, opening the suitcase without removing his snow-covered hat. "Who died?" thought the dog grumpily and unhappily, getting underfoot. "I can't stand it when people bustle around. Get out of the way. Hurry, hurry, hurry!" shouted Philip Filipovich in all directions and rang all the bells. As it seemed to the dog, Zina ran in. "Zina, put Darya Petrovna on the phone to write down all calls. Let no one come. I need you. Dr. Bormental. I implore you. Hurry, hurry. I don't like this. I don't." The dog frowned in offense and wandered around the apartment, while all the bustle was concentrated in the examining room. Zina appeared suddenly in a white coat resembling a shroud and ran back and forth between the examining room and the kitchen. "Should I get some grub? The hell with them," decided the dog, and got a sudden surprise. "Don't give Sharik anything," thundered the command from the examining room. "Like I can keep an eye on him. Lock him up." Sharik was lured and locked in the bathroom. Rudeness? Thought Sharik, sitting in the dim bathroom. Utter stupidity. He spent almost quarter of an hour in the bathroom in a strange mood. Sometimes angry, sometimes deeply depressed. Everything was dreary and unclear. "Fine, you'll have yourself galoshes tomorrow, my esteemed Philip Filipovich," he thought. "You've already had to buy 2 pairs, now you'll buy another. Teach you to lock up dogs." But suddenly his furious thought was interrupted. Unexpectedly and clearly he recalled a piece of his earliest youth. The sunny, huge expanse of the courtyard near the Preobrazhenskaya gate, the shards of sunshine in bottles, the broken brick, the free stray dogs. "No, no way can I leave here to be free, why lie?" said the dog drearily, breathing through his nose. "I'm used to it. I'm a gentleman's dog, an intelligent creature. I've tasted a better life. And what is freedom anyway? Just smoke, a mirage, a fiction. The delirium of those miserable Democrats." Then the dimness in the bathroom became terrible. He howled, threw himself against the door, began scratching at it. Oh! The sound traveled through the apartment as if in a barrel. "I'll tear up the owl again," the dog thought wildly, but impotently. Then he weakened, lay still, and when he stood up again, his hackles rose. For some reason he imagined the disgusting eyes of a wolf in the bath. At the peak of his torment, the door opened. The dog came out, shook himself, and gloomily headed for the kitchen. But Zina firmly led him by the collar to the examining room. A chill shot below the dog's heart. "What do they need me for?" he thought suspiciously. "My side has healed. I don't understand." And his paws slid over the slippery parquet floor, and that's how he was delivered to the examining room. He was struck right away by the unusual lighting. The white globe on the ceiling glowed so much that it hurt his eyes. In the white radiance stood a priest, softly singing about the sacred banks of the Nile. Only a vague scent let him recognize Philip Filipovich. His trimmed gray hair was hidden under a white cap that resembled a patriarch's skullcap. The priest was all in white, and over the white, like a scapular, was a narrow rubber apron. His hands were in black gloves. The bitten one was also wearing a skullcap. The long table was unfolded, and a small square one on a shiny leg had been moved next to it. Here the dog began to hate the bitten one more than anything, and mostly because of his eyes today. Usually bold and direct, now they ran in all directions away from the dog's eyes. They were tense, false, and in their depths was hidden a bad, nasty deed, if not an entire crime. The dog gave him a heavy, troubled look and went into the corner. "The collar, Zina," Philip Filipovich said softly. "Just don't excite him." Zina's eyes instantly became just as vile as the bitten one's. She came over to the dog and petted him with blatant falseness. He gave her a sad and scornful look. "Well, there's 3 of you. You'll get me if you want. But you're ashamed. If I only knew what you're going to do with me." Zina undid his collar. The dog shook his head and snorted. The bitten one arose before him with a vile, dizzying odor coming from him. "Pfui! Disgusting! Why do I feel so dizzy and afraid?" thought the dog and backed away from the bitten one. "Hurry, doctor," Philip Filipovich said impatiently. There was a sharp, sweet smell in the air. The bitten one, never taking his wary, lousy eyes from the dog, took his right hand from behind his back and quickly poked the dog's nose with a wad of damp cotton. Sharik was stunned. His head spun lightly, but he managed to back away. The bitten one leapt after him and suddenly plastered his face with the cotton. His breathing was blocked, but the dog managed to struggle free once more. "Villain," flashed through his mind. "What for?" They plastered his nose again. Suddenly, in the middle of the examining room, a lake appeared with very cheery spectral pink dogs in rowing boats on it. His legs lost their bones and bent. "On the table!" Philip Filipovich's words crashed somewhere in a merry voice and dissolved in orange streams. The horror vanished, replaced by joy, and for about 2 seconds the fading dog loved the bitten one. Then the whole world turned upside down, and he still felt a cold but pleasant hand under his belly. Then nothing. The dog Sharik lay splayed on the narrow operating table, and his head beat helplessly on the white oilcloth pillow. His stomach was shaved, and now Dr. Bormental, panting and hurrying, shaved Sharik's head with a machine, digging into the fur. Philip Filipovich, leaning his hands on the edge of the table, watched the procedure with his eyes as shiny as the gold frames of his glasses, and spoke in agitation. "Ivan Arnoldovich, the most important moment is when I enter the cella turcica. Instantly, I implore you. Hand me the appendage, and so immediately. If it starts hemorrhaging there, we'll lose time and we'll lose the dog. Actually, there's no chance for him anyway." He paused, squinting one eye, and glanced, mockingly it seemed, into the half-open sleeping eye of the dog, adding, "You know, I'm sorry for him. Just imagine, I'd grown used to him." He waved his hands as he spoke, as if blessing the miserable dog Sharik before his difficult exploit. He was trying to keep any dust from landing on the black rubber. The whitish skin of the dog glimmered beneath the shaved fur. Bormental tossed away the machine and armed himself with a razor. He soaped up the small, helpless head and started shaving. There was a strong crackling coming from the blade, and blood appeared in spots. Having finished shaving the head, the bitten one wiped it with a wet benzene rag, then stretched out the dog's naked belly, blew air out of his lips and said, "Ready." Zina turned on the water in the sink and Bormental rushed to wash his hands. Zina poured alcohol over them from a vial. "May I leave, Philip Filipovich?" she asked, with a fearful look at the dog's shaved head. "You may." Zina vanished. Bormental bustled further. He tucked light gauze napkins all around Sharik's head, and then a never-seen bald canine skull and a strange bearded muzzle appeared on the pillow. The priest moved. He straightened, looked at the dog's head, and said, "Well, bless us, Lord." Scalpel. Bormental pulled out a small tubby knife from the sparkling pile on the little table and handed it to the priest. Then he donned black gloves just like the priest's. "Is he asleep?" Philip Filipovich asked. "Fast asleep." Philip Filipovich's teeth clenched. His little eyes took on a sharp, spiky gleam and, raising up the scalpel, he drew a precise and long cut along Sharik's belly. The skin separated instantly, and blood spurted out in different directions. Bormental pounced like a predator, pressing on Sharik's wound with clumps of gauze, and then used small tweezers, like sugar tongs, to clamp its edges, and it dried. Sweat broke out in bubbles on Bormental's brow. Philip Filipovich sliced a second time, and they both started tearing at Sharik's body with hooks, scissors, and some sort of staples. Pink and yellow tissue, weeping with bloody dew, flew out. Philip Filipovich twirled his knife in the body and then shouted, "Scissors!" The instrument flashed in the bitten one's hands as if he were a magician. Philip Filipovich dug deep and in a few turns tore out Sharik's testicles with some dangling bits from his body. Bormental, completely wet with effort and excitement, rushed to a glass jar and removed other, wet and drooping testicles. Short damp strings leapt and twisted in the hands of the professor and assistant. Crooked needles clicked in the clamps, and the testicles were sewn in place of Sharik's. The priest fell back from the wound, poked it with a clump of gauze and ordered, "Sew up the skin instantly, doctor." Then he looked over at the round white clock. "We took 14 minutes, Bormental said through clenched teeth, digging the crooked needle into the flabby skin. Then both men grew more agitated, like murderers who were in a hurry. "Scalpel!" shouted Philip Filipovich. The scalpel jumped into his hand as if by itself, after which Philip Filipovich's face grew terrible. He bared his porcelain and gold crowns and in one stroke drew a bloody crown on Sharik's brow. They flipped over the skin with shorn hair like a scalp. They revealed the skull. Philip Filipovich shouted, "Trepan!" Bormental handed him the gleaming hand drill. Biting his lips, Philip Filipovich began jabbing the instrument into the skull and drilling little holes a centimeter apart, so that they went all around the skull. He spent no more than 5 seconds per hole. Then, using an unusual saw, sticking its tail into the first hole, he started sawing the way ladies' sewing kits are made. The skull buzzed and shook softly. In about 3 minutes they removed the top of Sharik's skull. That revealed the dome of Sharik's brain, gray with bluish veins and reddish spots. Philip Filipovich dug into the membranes with the scissors and opened them up. At one point, a thin fountain of blood gushed out, almost hitting the professor in the eye, spotting his cap. Bormental leapt like a tiger with artery forceps to staunch it and succeeded. Sweat slid in torrents from Bormental and his face turned meaty and multicolored. His eyes raced from Philip Filipovich's hands to the plate on the table. Philip Filipovich had become positively terrifying. Hissing sounds came from his nose and his teeth were bared to the gums. He tore off the membrane from the brain and went deep inside, moving the hemispheres of the brain out of the open bowl. At that moment Bormental went pale, grabbed Sharik's chest with one hand, and said hoarsely, "His pulse is falling rapidly." Philip Filipovich gave him a wild look, muttered something and dug in deeper. Bormental broke a glass ampoule with a crunch, sucked it into a hypodermic needle and treacherously injected Sharik somewhere near his heart. "I'm headed for the cella turcica," roared Philip Filipovich, and with his bloody, slippery gloves removed Sharik's yellow-gray brain from his head. For an instant he squinted at Sharik's muzzle, and Bormental immediately broke a second ampoule with yellow liquid and sucked it into a long hypodermic. "Into the heart?" he asked meekly. "Why are you still asking?" the professor roared angrily. "He's died on you 5 times by now. Inject. It's unthinkable." His face had come to resemble an inspired highway robber. The doctor took a swing and inserted the needle into the dog's heart. "He's alive, just barely," he whispered meekly. "There's no time to discuss whether he's alive or not," fumed the terrible Philip Filipovich. "I'm in the cella. He'll die anyway. Oh damn. To the sacred banks. Give me the appendage." Bormental handed him a jar in which a white lump dangled on a thread in liquid. "He has no equals in Europe, I swear," thought Bormental. With one hand, Philip Filipovich pulled out the dangling lump, and with the other, using scissors, cut out a similar lump deep between the splayed hemispheres. He tossed Sharik's lump onto the plate and put the new one into the brain along with the thread, and with his short fingers, which had miraculously become slender and flexible, managed to wrap it into place with the amber thread. After that he tossed out some clamps and forceps from Sharik's head, tucked the brain back into the brain pan, leant back and asked more calmly, "Dead, of course." "Thready pulse," replied Bormental. "More adrenaline." The professor tossed the membrane over the brain, laid the sawn-off top neatly in place, moved the scalp back, and roared, "So!" Bormental sewed up the head in about 5 minutes, breaking 3 needles. And now on the pillow, a background colored by blood, appeared Sharik's lifeless, dimmed muzzle with a ring wound around his head. Here Philip Filipovich leant back completely, like a sated vampire, tore off one glove, shaking out a cloud of sweaty powder, tore a hole in the other, threw it on the floor and called, using the button on the wall. Zina appeared in the doorway, head averted, so as not to see Sharik and the blood. The priest removed the bloody skullcap with chalky hands and shouted, "Get me a cigarette right now, Zina. All fresh linens and a bath." He rested his chin on the edge of the table, opened the dog's right eye with 2 fingers, peered into the clearly dying eye and said, "There, damn it, he didn't die. Well, he will anyway. Ah, Dr. Bormental, I'm sorry about the dog. He was friendly, albeit wily." Chapter 5. The Notebook of Ivan Arnoldovich Bormental. A thin notebook the size of typing paper, filled in Bormental's hand. The writing in the first 2 pages is neat, organized and clear. Later, it becomes scrawled, agitated, with many blots. December 22nd, 1924. Monday. QQQ case history. Laboratory dog approximately 2 years old. Male. Breed mutt. Name Sharik. Fur thin, in clumps, grayish-brown with spots. Tail the color of baked milk. Traces of fully healed burn on left side. Nutrition before coming to the professor was poor. After a week's stay, very fat. Weight 8 kilograms! Exclamation mark. Heart, lungs, stomach, temperature within norm. December 23rd, at 8:30 p.m. The first such operation in Europe developed by Professor Preobrazhensky was performed. Under chloroform, Sharik's testicles were removed and replaced with a man's testicles with appendages and spermatic cords, taken from a 28-year-old man who died 4 hours and 4 minutes before the operation and kept in sterile physiological liquid developed by Professor Preobrazhensky. Immediately thereafter, an appendage of the brain, the pituitary gland, was removed after trepanning the skull and replaced by a human one from the aforementioned man. Introduced 8 cubic centimeter of chloroform, 1 syringe of camphor, 2 syringes of adrenaline into the heart. Reasons for the operation. An experiment by Preobrazhensky to combine transplantation of the pituitary gland and testicles to determine whether the pituitary gland is transplantable and, in the future, its influence on rejuvenation of humans. Operation was performed by Professor F. Preobrazhensky, assisted by Dr. I. A. Bormental. The night after the operation, threatening repeated drops in pulse. Expectation of fatal outcome. Huge doses of camphor per Preobrazhensky. December 24th. Morning improvement. Respiratory rate doubled. Temperature 42. Camphor and caffeine subcutaneously. December 25th. Deterioration of condition again. Pulse barely detected. Cooling of extremities. No response in pupils. Adrenaline in the heart and camphor per Preobrazhensky. Saline intravenously. December 26th. Some improvement. Pulse 180. Respiration 92. Temperature 41. Camphor nutrition via enemas. December 27th. Pulse 152. Breathing 50. Temperature 39.8. Pupils respond. Camphor subcutaneously. December 28th. Significant improvement. At noon, a sudden drenching sweat. Temperature, 37.0. Surgical wounds in previous condition. Rebandaging. Appetite appeared. Liquid diet. December 29th. Sudden discovery of fur falling out on forehead and sides of body. Brought in for consultation. Professor of Dermatology Faculty Vasily Vasilyevich Bondarev and the director of the Moscow Model Veterinary Institute. They consider the incident never described in the literature. Diagnosis remains unestablished. Temperature normal. Written in pencil. Tonight first bark, 8.15. Noteworthy sharp change in timbre and tone, lower. Bark, instead of word, bow wow. In syllable AO. In coloration, faintly resembles groaning. December 30th. Falling out of fur has taken on the character of general balding. Weighing revealed unexpected result. Weight is 30 kilos due to bone growth. Lengthening. Dog still lying as before. December 31st. Colossal appetite. A splotch in the notebook. After the ink blot in hasty scrawl. At 12.12 the dog clearly barked the word, "Abier." There is a break in the notebook and then, apparently by mistake caused by agitation, it says, December 1st. Crossed out and corrected. January 1st, 1925. Photographed in the morning. Clearly barks a burr, repeating the word loudly and somehow joyfully. At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, in capital letters, he laughed, causing the maid Zina to faint. In the evening pronounced the word, aburvalg, a burr, 8 times in a row, in crooked letters written in pencil. The professor deciphered the word, aburvalg. It means, Glavraba, the fish store, something monster. January 2nd. Photographed while smiling with magnesium flash. Got out of bed and confidently stood for half an hour on his hind legs. Almost my height. A sheet slipped into the notebook. Russian science nearly suffered a tremendous loss. QQQ case history on Professor. QQQF. F. Preobrazhensky. At 1.13, Professor Preobrazhensky fell into a deep faint. Falling, he struck his head on a chair leg. Tincture of valerian. In my presence and Zina's, the dog, if he can be called a dog, that is, rudely cursed Professor Preobrazhensky's mother. Break in notes. January 6th. Alternating pencil and violet ink. Today, after his tail fell off, he said completely clearly, beer hall, using the phonograph recorder. What the hell is this? I am at a loss. No more office hours. Starting at 5 p.m. Coming from the examining room, where this creature strolls about, clear vulgar cursing and the words, another pair. January 7th. He says many words, coachman, no room, evening gazette, the best present for children, and all the swear words that exist in the Russian lexicon. He looks strange. Fur remains only on the head, chin and chest. The rest is bald with flabby skin. In the area of genitals, a man is forming. The skull has enlarged significantly, the forehead sloping and low. I swear to God I will go mad. Philip Filipovich is still feeling poorly. I do most of the observations, photographs. Rumors are spreading throughout the city. The consequences are incalculable. Today the whole street was full of wastrels and old women. The gawkers are still standing under our windows. The morning papers had an amazing report. Rumors of a Martian in Obakov Lane are baseless. They are being spread by merchants on Sukharevka, and they will be severely punished. What Martian, damn it? It's a nightmare. It's even better in the Evening Gazette. They wrote that an infant was born that plays the violin. There's a drawing of the violin and my photograph and the caption. Professor Preobrazhensky, who performed the cesarean on the mother. This is indescribable. His new word, policeman. Turns out, Darya Petrovna was in love with me and stole my photo from FS album. After I chased out the reporters, one sneaked into the kitchen and so on. What goes on during office hours? There were 82 calls today. The telephone is unplugged. Childless ladies have gone mad and are coming. The Bildcom headed by Schwander. Why they came, they don't know themselves. January 8th. Late this evening, we came up with the diagnosis. F. F. Like a true scientist, admitted his mistake. Replacing the pituitary gland does not yield rejuvenation but complete humanization, underlined 3 times. This does not in any way lessen his astonishing, amazing discovery. That one walked around the apartment today for the first time. He laughed in the corridor, looking at the electric light. Then, accompanied by Philip Filipovich and myself, he continued into the study. He is steady on his hind, crossed-out legs and looks like a small and poorly built man. He laughed in the study. His smile is unpleasant and somehow artificial. Then he scratched his head, looked around, and I took down a new, clearly enunciated word, bourgeois. He swore. His swearing is methodical, ceaseless, and, apparently, completely meaningless. It bears a rather phonographic character. As if this creature had heard swear words somewhere, automatically and unconsciously recorded them in his brain, and was now bringing them up in packets. But, of course, I'm not a psychiatrist. Damn it. The cursing has a surprisingly depressive effect on Philip Filipovich. There are moments when he escapes his restrained and cold observation of new phenomena and seems to lose his patience. Thus, during the cursing, he suddenly shouted nervously, "Down!" This had no effect. After the walk in the study, with our joint efforts, Sharik was forced back into the examining room. After that, Philip Filipovich and I had a conference. This is the first time, I must admit, that I have seen this confident and astonishingly intelligent man at a loss. Humming as usual, he asked, "What will we do now?" And he replied himself literally this way, "Mosque tailor, yes, from Seville to Granada. Mosque tailor, dear doctor." I understood nothing. He explained, "I am asking you, Ivan Arnoldovich, to buy him linens, trousers, and a jacket. January 9th. His vocabulary is enriched every 5 minutes, on average, by a new word and, since this morning, phrases. It seems that they were frozen in his consciousness and are thawing and coming out. The new words remain in use. Since yesterday, I have recorded on the phonograph, 'Don't push, beat him, scoundrel, get off the step, I'll show you, American acclaim, and Primus.' January 10th. The dressing took place. He permitted the undershirt readily, even laughing merrily. He refused the underpants, expressing his protest with hoarse cries, 'Get in line, you sons of bitches, get in line.' He was dressed. The socks are too big. Schematic drawings in the notebooks, apparently depicting the transformation of a dog's leg into a human one. The back half of the foot skeleton tarsus lengthens. The toes extend. Claws. Repeated systematic training on visiting toilet. The maid is completely depressed. But the creature's comprehension must be noted. Things are moving in the right direction. January 11th. He's completely accepted trousers. Said a long, cheerful phrase, touching Philip Filipovich's trousers. "Gimme a smoke. Your pants are a joke." The fur on his head is weak and silky, easily confused with hair, but the spots remain on his temples. Today the last of the fuzz wore off his ears. Colossal appetite. Enjoyed the herring. At 5 o'clock an event. For the first time, the words spoken by the creature were not at a remove from surrounding events but were a reaction to them. To wit, when the professor ordered, "Don't throw bones on the floor," he responded unexpectedly, "Shove off, pal." F. was astonished, then collected himself and said, "If you ever dare to swear at me or the doctor, you will be punished." I photographed Sharik at that moment. I swear that he understood the professor's words. A sullen shadow fell over his face. He looked up in irritation from beneath his brows, but he quietened down. Hurrah, he understands. January 12th. Putting hands in pockets. Training him not to curse. He whistled, "Oh, little apple." Holds up his end of a conversation. I can't refrain from several hypotheses. The hell with rejuvenation for now. The other is immeasurably more important. Professor Preobrazinski's amazing experiment has revealed one of the secrets of the human brain. Now the mysterious function of the pituitary gland, the brain's appendage, has been clarified. It determines the human image. Its hormones can be called the most important in the organism, the hormones of image. A new area in science is opened. Without using Faust's retort, a homunculus is created. The surgeon's scalpel brought a new human unit into life. Professor Preobrazhensky, you are a creator. Ink blot. But I digress. And so, he holds up his end of a conversation. As I see it, this is the situation. The transplanted pituitary gland opened the speech center in the dog's brain, and the words gushed in torrents. I think that we are seeing a revived, developed brain and not a newly created brain. Oh, marvelous confirmation of the theory of evolution. Oh, the great chain from dog to Mendeleev the chemist. Here is another of my hypotheses. Sharik's brain in the canine period of his life accumulated a ton of concepts. All the words that he used first were street words which he had heard and kept in his brain. Now, walking down the street, I look at dogs with hidden horror. God only knows what's in their brains. Sharik can read. Read! 3 exclamation marks. I was the one to guess it. From Glavraba. He read it backwards from the end. And I even know where the solution to this puzzle lies. In the decussation of the dog's optic nerves. What's going on in Moscow is beyond human comprehension. 7 Sakharevsky merchants have been imprisoned for spreading rumors about the doomsday brought on by the Bolsheviks. Daria Petrovna said and even named the date. November 28, 1925, the day of St. Stephen the Martyr. The earth will hit the heavenly axis. Some swindlers are already giving lectures. We've created such a hullabaloo with that pituitary that I just want to flee the apartment. I've moved into Preobrazhensky's at his request and I sleep in the reception room with Sharik. The examining room has been turned into the reception. Schwander was right. The buildcom is gloating. There are no panes left in any of the cupboards because he was jumping. We barely taught him to stop. Something terrible is happening to Philip. When I told him about my hypotheses and my hope to develop Sharik into a psychologically elevated individual, he snorted and replied, "Really?" His tone was vicious. Could I be mistaken? The old man has come up with something. While I struggle with the case history, he pores over the case history of the man whose pituitary gland we removed. Inserted sheet in the notebook. Klim Grigorievich Chugunkin, 25. Bachelor. No party membership, a sympathizer. Tried 3 times and acquitted. The first time because of lack of evidence. The second, his origin saved him. And the third, he got a suspended sentence of 15 years hard labor. Theft. Profession. Playing the balalaika in taverns. Short, poorly built. Swollen liver, alcohol. Cause of death. Stabbed in the heart at the stop signal bar near the Preobrazhensky gate. The old man sits with Klim's chart without cease. I don't understand the point. He muttered something about not having had the sense to examine Chugunkin's entire body at the morgue. I just don't understand. Does it matter whose pituitary gland it is? January 17th. I haven't made notes in several days. Had influenza. Over that time, the image has formed completely. A completely human in body. B. Weight around 100 pounds. C. Short stature. D. Small head. E. Has started smoking. F. Eats human food. G. Dresses independently. H. Converses fluently. That's some pituitary. Blot. Herewith I end the medical history. Before us is a new organism, and it must be observed from the beginning. Attachments. Transcripts of speech, phonograph recordings, photographic pictures. Signed, Assistant to Professor F. Preobrazhensky, Dr. Bormental. Chapter 6. It was a winter evening. Late January. Before dinner, before office hours. A sheet of white paper hung on a hook by the door to the reception room, on which was written in Philip Filipovich's hand, I forbid eating sunflower seeds in the apartment. F. Preobrazhensky. And in blue pencil with letters as large as pastries, in Bormental's hand, playing musical instruments between the hours of 5 p.m. and 7 a.m. is forbidden. Then in Zina's hand, when you get back, tell Philip Filipovich. I don't know where he went. Fyodor said he was with Schwander. In Preobrazhensky's hand, Will I have to wait 100 years for the glazier? In Darya Petrovna's hand, block letters. Zina went to the store. She said she would bring him. The dining room felt completely like evening, thanks to the lamp with the silk shade. The light from the buffet sideboard fell broken in half. The mirrored panes were taped in an angled cross from one facet to the other. Philip Filipovich, bent over the table, was immersed in the enormous sheet of the unfolded newspaper. Flashes of lightning distorted his face and fragmented, broken, grumbling words slipped through his teeth. He read the notice. There is no doubt that he is his illegitimate, as they used to say in the rotten bourgeois society, son. That is how our pseudo-scientific bourgeoisie amuses itself. Each one knows how to occupy 7 rooms until the gleaming sword of justice shines above him in a red beam. HVR. A balalaika was playing very persistently and with a dashing agility 2 rooms away, and the sounds of a clever variation on the moon is shining, mixed in Philip Filipovich's head with the words from the newspaper into a hateful mush. When he finished reading, he spat dryly over his shoulder and unthinkingly sang through his teeth. The moon is shining, shining. The moon is shining. Pfui. It's stuck in my brain. Damn tune. He rang. Zina's face showed between the drapes. Tell him it's 5 o'clock. Time to stop. And call him here, please. Philip Filipovich sat in an armchair by the table. A brown cigar stub stuck out from between the fingers of his left hand. By the drapes, leaning against the lintel, one leg behind the other, stood a short man with an unpleasant appearance. The hair on his head was bristly, like shrubs on a plowed field, and there was unshaven fluff on his face. His brow was astonishingly low. The thick brush of hair began almost directly above the black tassels of his widespread eyebrows. His jacket, torn under the left arm, was sprinkled with straw. The right knee of the striped trousers was ripped and the left smeared with purple paint. Around his neck, the little man wore a tie of a toxic sky color with a fake ruby pin. The color of that tie was so bright that from time to time, shutting his weary eyes, Philip Filipovich could see in total darkness a blazing torch with a blue flame on the ceiling or the wall. Opening them, he was blinded anew by the sight of patent leather lace-up shoes with white spats spraying fountains of light from the floor. Like galoshes, thought Philip Filipovich with an unpleasant feeling, sighed, huffed, and began fussing with the cigar that had gone out. The man in the doorway regarded the professor with murky eyes and smoked a paparosa, scattering ash on his shirt front. The clock on the wall next to the wooden hazel grouse struck 5. Something inside the clock was still groaning when Philip Filipovich embarked on a conversation. I believe I've asked you twice now not to sleep on the plank bed by the stove in the kitchen, especially in the daytime? The man coughed hoarsely, as if choking on a bone, and replied, The air is more pleasant in the kitchen. His voice was unusual, soft yet resonant, as if in a small barrel. Philip Filipovich shook his head and asked, Where did you get that vile thing? I'm speaking of the tie. The man, following the pointing finger, squinted over his pouting lip and looked lovingly at the tie. Why vile? He said. It's a fabulous tie. Darya Petrovna gave it to me. Darya Petrovna gave you a vile thing, like those shoes. What is that glowing nonsense? From where? What did I request? Buy decent shoes. And what is this? Could Dr. Bormental have picked those out? I told him to get patent leather. What, am I worse than other people? Go out on Kuznetsky. Everyone's wearing patent leather. Philip Filipovich turned his head and spoke significantly. Sleeping on the kitchen bed is ended. Understood? What obnoxiousness. You are in the way. There are women there. The man's face darkened and his lips stuck out. Some women. Big deal. Fancy ladies. An ordinary servant and she acts like a commissar. It's that Zinka tattling. Philip Filipovich gave him a stern look. Don't you dare call Zina Zinka. Do you understand? Silence. Do you understand, I said? I understand. Remove that thing from your neck. You. Just take a look at yourself in the mirror. You're a sight. A circus act. No throwing butts on the floor. I'm telling you for the 100th time. I don't want to hear another swear word in the apartment. No spitting. There's the spittoon. Be careful at the urinal. No talking to Zina at all. She complains that you lurk in the dark waiting for her. Watch it. Who told a patient the dog only knows? Do you think you're in a tavern? You're really putting the squeeze on me, Pops? The man said plaintively. Philip Filipovich reddened and his spectacles gleamed. Who here is a Pops to you? What familiarity? I never want to hear that word again. Use my name and patronymic when you address me. A presumptuous expression flashed in the man. You and your rules. Don't spit, don't smoke. Don't go there. What is all this? It's just like being on the tram. Why won't you let me live? And it won't work about the Pops. You know, did I ask to have the surgery? The man barked in outrage. Fine behavior. Grabbed an animal, sliced up his head, and now you mock him. Maybe I didn't give my permission for the surgery. And maybe, neither did, the little man looked up at the ceiling as if trying to recall a formulation. Neither did my family. Maybe I have the right to sue. Philip Filipovich's eyes grew completely round and the cigar fell from his hands. What a character! Flew through his mind. What? He asked, narrowing his eyes. You dare to be displeased to have been turned into a human. Perhaps you would prefer to run around the rubbish dump again? Freeze in the alleys? Well, had I but known. Why do you keep berating me with the dump? I was earning my crust. What if I had died under your knife? What do you have to express about that, comrade? Philip Filipovich. Philip Filipovich exclaimed in irritation. I'm no comrade of yours. This is monstrous. He thought, a nightmare, a nightmare. Yes, of course we understand, said the man ironically and victoriously set his foot back. We understand. How could we be comrades? No way. We weren't educated in universities or brought up in 15-room apartments with bathrooms. But now it is time to drop all that. At the present time, everyone has the right dash. Philip Filipovich turned pale as he listened to the man's ruminations. The latter interrupted his speech and demonstratively headed towards the ashtray carrying his chewed paparosa. He had a swaying gait. He crushed the butt in the tray for a long time, his expression clearly saying, Take that, and that. Having put out the paparosa, he suddenly clicked his teeth and stuck his nose under his arm. Catch fleas with your fingers. Your fingers! Shouted Philip Filipovich furiously. And I can't understand where you get them. What do you think, that I breed them or something? The man was insulted. Apparently, fleas like me, he said, feeling around in the lining under his sleeve and releasing a clump of reddish cotton batting into the air. Philip Filipovich turned his gaze to the garlands on the ceiling and drummed his fingers on the table. The man executed the flea and moved away to sit on a chair. He let his hands dangle from the wrists along the lapels of his jacket. His eyes squinted towards the squares of the parquet floor. He was admiring his shoes, which gave him great pleasure. Philip Filipovich glanced down at the harsh glints of light on the squared toes, narrowed his eyes, and spoke. What other matter did you want to report to me? Some matter. It's a simple matter. I need a document. Philip Filipovich. A nerve twitched on Philip Filipovich's face. Damn. A document. Really? Well, maybe it can be avoided somehow. His voice was unconfident and bleak. Oh, please, the man replied confidently. How can one be without a document? Well, excuse me. You know that a person is strictly forbidden to exist without a document. First of all, the buildcom. What does this buildcom have to do with it? What do you mean, what? They run into me. They ask, when are you going to register? Esteemed one? Oh my God! Exclaimed Philip Filipovich drearily. Run into you, they ask? I can imagine what you tell them. Don't forget that I have forbidden you to skulk around the stairs. What am I, a convict? The man demanded, and the consciousness of his righteousness burned even in his ruby. What do you mean skulk? Your words are rather offensive. I walk like everyone else. He slid his patent-leathered feet along the floor. Philip Filipovich grew silent and averted his eyes. I really need to control myself, he thought. He went to the buffet and gulped down a glass of water. Fine, he said more calmly. It's not about the words. So, what does this charming build-com of yours say? What is there to say? And you needn't berate it as charming. It defends interests. Whose interests? May I inquire? You know whose. The laboring element. Philip Filipovich's eyes bulged. How are you a laborer? You know I'm not a NEP man. Well, all right. Thus, what does it need to defend your revolutionary interests? You know what register me? They say it's impossible for a man to live in Moscow unregistered. That's one. But the most important thing is a registration card. I don't want to be a deserter. And then the union, the exchange dash. Would you please tell me where I'm supposed to register you? On this tablecloth? On my own passport? You have to consider the situation. Don't forget that you are, so to speak, an unexpected creature, a laboratory. Philip Filipovich spoke with dwindling confidence. The man maintained a victorious silence. Excellent. What then is needed, really, in order to register you and generally arrange things according to the plan of this build-com of yours? After all, you have no name or surname. You're being unfair. I can select a name for myself quite easily. Just print it in the newspaper and wham! Presto! And what do you wish to be called? The man adjusted his tie and replied, Polygraph Polygraphovich. Stop playing the fool. Philip Filipovich responded sourly. I'm being serious with you. A sarcastic smirk twisted the man's little mustache. I seem to be missing something here, he said merrily and meaningfully. I can't swear, I can't spit, and all I hear from you is fool and fool. Apparently, only professors are allowed to swear in the RSFSR. Blood rushed to Philip Filipovich's head, and as he poured water into a glass, he broke it. Drinking from another, he thought, a little more and he'll start lecturing me and he'll be absolutely right. I can't control myself anymore. He bowed with exaggerated politeness and with iron firmness in his voice he said, Forgive me, my nerves are shot. Your name seems strange to me. I wonder where you dug it up. The build-com suggested it. They looked in the calendar, which one do you want? And I picked it. There couldn't be anything of the sort in any calendar. That's rather surprising, the man chuckled. Since it's in your examining room. Philip Filipovich leant back without getting out of his chair to the button on the wallpaper, and Zina appeared in response to the ring. The calendar from the examining room. A pause ensued. When Zina returned with the calendar, Philip Filipovich asked, Where? He's celebrated on March 4th. Show me. Itchem. Damn. Into the stove with it. Zina, right now. Zina, eyes bulging in fear, left with the calendar, and the man shook his head reproachfully. May I know your surname? I'm willing to take my hereditary surname. What? Hereditary? That is. Sharikov, chairman of the Buildcom Schwander, in a double-breasted leather jacket, stood in front of the desk in the study. Dr. Bormental sat in the armchair. The doctor's frost-reddened cheeks, he had just returned, bore the same bewildered expression as Philip Filipovich. What should be written? He asked impatiently. Why, Schwander said, it's not complicated. Write an affidavit, citizen professor. That, like, the holder of this is indeed citizen Sharikov Polygraph Polygraphovich H.M. Conceived in your, apartment dash. Bormental, surprised, shifted in his chair. Philip Filipovich's mustache twitched. H.M. What the hell? I can't imagine anything stupider than this. He wasn't conceived at all, but simply, well, basically dash. That's your problem, Schwander said with calm gloating. Whether he was conceived or not. The whole point is that you did the experiment, Professor. So you created Citizen Sharikov. It's really simple, barked Sharikov from the bookcase. He was peering at his tie, reflected in the mirrored abyss. I would beg you, Philip Filipovich snarled, not to interfere in the conversation. You are wrong to say it's really simple. It is really not simple. How can I not interfere? Sharikov muttered in an injured tone, and Schwander instantly supported him. Forgive me, Professor, Citizen Sharikov is completely correct. It is his right to participate in the discussion of his own fate, especially since the matter concerns documents. A document is the most important thing in the world. At that moment, a deafening ring above his ear broke off the conversation. Philip Filipovich said into the receiver, "Yes," reddened and shouted. "I ask that you not distract me with trifles. What's it to you?" And he whipped the receiver into the cradle. An idyllic joy spread over Schwander's face. Philip Filipovich, turning crimson, shouted, "Let's finish this." He tore a sheet out of a pad and scribbled a few words, which he read aloud in irritation. "I hereby attest, damned if I know what this is, HM. The bearer is a person obtained by laboratory experiment via an operation on the brain who needs documents. Damn! I am against you obtaining these idiotic documents. Signed, Professor Preobrazhensky." "It's rather strange, Professor," Schwander said, taking umbrage. "How can you call documents idiotic? I cannot allow the habitation in our building of an undocumented resident, especially one who has not been put on the army draft list by the police. What if there is a war with imperialist predators?" "I'm not going to any war," Sharikov barked grimly into the bookcase. Schwander was taken aback but quickly regained his position and noted obligingly to Sharikov, "You, Citizen Sharikov, are speaking unconsciously in the highest degree. You must be on the military list." "I'll go on the list, but fight, you can go blow," Sharikov replied with hostility, adjusting the bow. It was Schwander's turn to be confused. Preobrazhensky looked over at Bormental both viciously and sadly. "Fine morals, eh?" Bormental nodded significantly. "I was heavily wounded during the operation," Sharikov whined grimly. "See what they did to me?" He pointed to his head. A very fresh surgical scar stretched across his brow. "Are you an anarchist individualist?" Schwander asked, eyebrows rising high. "I should have a medical exemption," Sharikov responded to that. "Well, that's not important right now," replied the astounded Schwander. "The fact is that we will send the professor's affidavit to the police and you will be given a document." "Here's the thing, Philip Filipovich interrupted, clearly tormented by some thought or other. "Would you have a free room in the building? I'm willing to buy it." Yellow sparks appeared in Schwander's brown eyes. "No, Professor, to my great regret. No possibility of one." Philip Filipovich compressed his lips and said nothing. The phone rang like mad again. Philip Filipovich, without answering it, silently threw the receiver from the cradle so hard that it spun a bit and then dangled on its light blue cord. Everyone shuddered. "The old man's nerves are shot," thought Bormental, while Schwander, eyes gleaming, bowed and left. Sharikov, the leather borders of his shoes creaking, followed him out. The professor was left alone with Bormental. After a short time, Philip Filipovich shook his head rapidly and began speaking. "It's a nightmare, upon my word. Do you see? I swear, dear doctor, these last 2 weeks have been more exhausting than the last 14 years. He's a character. I'll tell you dash." In the distance, glass smashed softly. Then a stifled female scream flew up and immediately went out. An evil spirit raced across the wallpaper in the hallway, heading for the examining room, where something crashed and instantly flew back again. Doors slammed and Darya Petrovna's low cry resounded in the kitchen. Then Sharikov howled. "My God! What now?" shouted Philip Filipovich, rushing to the door. "A cat," surmised Bormental and rushed out behind him. They ran down the corridor to the entrance, burst in, from there turned down the corridor to the toilet and bathroom. Zina jumped out of the kitchen and bumped right into Philip Filipovich. "How many times have I given the orders, no cats?" Philip Filipovich shouted furiously. "Where is he? Ivan Arnoldovich, calm down the patients in the reception. For God's sake. In the bathroom. The damned devil is in the bathroom," Zina shrieked, panting. Philip Filipovich shoved against the bathroom door, but it did not yield. "Open up this second." In response, something jumped around the locked bathroom walls, knocking over basins, and Sharikov's wild voice roared mutedly beyond the door. "I'll kill you on the spot. Water rushed through the pipes and poured out. Philip Filipovich pushed harder on the door and began tugging at it. Overheated Darya Petrovna, her face contorted, appeared in the kitchen doorway. Then the high glass pane, leading from the bathroom to the kitchen at ceiling level, crashed with a vermiform crack and 2 shards fell from it, followed by a huge cat with tiger stripes and a pale blue ribbon on his neck, looking like a policeman. It fell right on the table onto the long serving dish, which broke in half lengthwise, leapt from the dish to the floor, then turned on 3 legs, raising the right one as if dancing, and instantly squeezed through a narrow crevice onto the back stairs. The crevice expanded, and the cat was replaced by an old lady's physig in a kerchief. The old woman's skirt, sprinkled with white polka dots, appeared in the kitchen. The old woman wiped her concave mouth with her index finger and thumb, cast her puffy and prickly eyes around the kitchen, and said with curiosity, "Oh, Lord Jesus!" Pale Philip Filipovich crossed the kitchen and asked the old woman sternly, "What do you want?" "I'd like a look at the talking dog," the old woman replied beseechingly and crossed herself. Philip Filipovich grew even paler, came right up to the woman and whispered stiflingly, "Out of this kitchen this second." The old woman backed towards the door and said in an injured voice, "You're awfully rude, Professor, sir." "Out, I say," repeated Philip Filipovich, and his eyes grew as round as the owl's. He personally slammed the back door behind the old woman. "Darya Petrovna, haven't I asked you before?" "Philip Filipovich," replied Darya Petrovna in despair, balling up her exposed hands into fists. "What can I do? People keep trying to barge in all day. I'd have to drop everything else." The water in the bathroom roared dull and threatening, but no voices were heard. Dr. Bormental came in. "Ivan Arnoldovich, I beg you." "Chum. How many patients out there?" 11, Bormental replied. "Let them all go. I won't see patients today." Philip Filipovich rapped his knuckle on the door and shouted, "Come out this moment. Why have you locked yourself in?" Oh. Sharikov's voice was piteous and dull. "What the hell? I can't hear you. Turn off the water." "Woof. Oh, turn it off. What has he done?" "I don't understand," shrieked Philip Filipovich in a rage. Zina and Darya Petrovna, mouths agape, stared at the door in despair. A suspicious splashing joined the noise of the rushing water. Philip Filipovich banged his fist on the door. "There he is," called Darya Petrovna from the kitchen. Philip Filipovich hurried there. In the broken window by the ceiling, Polygraph Polygrafovich's mug appeared and pushed through into the kitchen. It was contorted, the eyes weepy, and a scratch, flaming with fresh blood, extended along his nose. "Have you lost your mind?" asked Philip Filipovich. "Why aren't you coming out?" Sharikov, also in despair and fear, looked around and replied, "I'm clicked in. Open the lock." "What? Haven't you ever seen a lock?" "It won't open, damn it," Polygraph replied fearfully. "Lordy, he clicked the double lock," cried Zina and clasped her hands. "There's a little button," shouted Philip Filipovich, trying to be heard over the water. "Push it down. Down. Push it down." Sharikov vanished and returned to the window in a minute. "Too dark to see a dog in here," he barked in horror through the window. "Turn on the light. He's gone mad." "Damned cat smashed the lamp," replied Sharikov. "So I started to grab the bastard by the legs. The tap got twisted off and now I can't find it." All 3 clasped their hands before them and froze in that position. About 5 minutes later, Bormental, Zina and Darya Petrovna were sitting next to each other on a wet rug rolled up at the bottom of the door, using their nether parts to press it against the crack under the door, while Fyodor the doorman, holding Darya Petrovna's wedding candle, climbed up the wooden ladder to the dormer window. His rear end in large gray checks flashed in the air and vanished into the opening. "Woofo!" Sharikov shouted something through the roar of the water. Under pressure, water sprayed a few times onto the kitchen ceiling and then grew still. Fyodor's voice could be heard. "Philip Filipovich, we have to open the door anyway. Let it flow out. We'll pump it out of the kitchen." "Open!" cried Philip Filipovich angrily. The troika stood up from the rug, The bathroom door was opened and a wave poured into the hallway. There, it separated into 3 streams. Straight into the toilet opposite, right to the kitchen, and left to the entrance. Sloshing and hopping, Zina slammed the door to the entrance. Ankle deep in water, Fyodor came out, smiling for some reason. He looked as if he had been wrapped in oilcloth, all wet. Barely shut it off, the pressure is strong, he explained. Where is he? Philip Filipovich asked and raised one foot with a curse. Afraid to come out. Chuckling stupidly, Fyodor explained. Will you beat me, Pops? Came Sharikov's whiny voice from the bathroom. Idiot! Responded Philip Filipovich succinctly. Zina and Darya Petrovna, skirts tucked above the knee and bare-legged, and Sharikov and the doorman, barefoot with pants rolled up, swabbed the kitchen floor with wet rags, which they wrung out into dirty buckets in the sink. The abandoned stove hummed. Water went out the door to the back stairs right through the staircase, falling into the cellar. Bormental, standing on tiptoe in a deep puddle on the parquet floor of the entrance, negotiated through the door opened on the chain. No doctor's hours today, the professor is unwell. Please, move away from the door. We had a burst pipe. When will he receive? A voice behind the door demanded. I just need a minute. I can't, Bormental said, rocking back from his toes onto his heels. The professor is lying down and the pipe is burst. Please come back tomorrow. Zina, dear, wipe away from here, otherwise it will pour out onto the front stairs. The rags won't take it. We'll bail it out with mugs, called Fyodor. Coming. The doorbell kept ringing, and now Bormental's whole foot was in the water. Then when will the surgery be? Importuned a voice trying to push through the crack. The pipe burst. I can come in my galoshes. Bluish silhouettes appeared beyond the door. Sorry, come back tomorrow. But I have an appointment. Tomorrow. We've had a catastrophe with the plumbing. Fyodor squirmed around at the doctor's feet in the lake, bailing with a mug, while scratched-up Sharikov came up with a new method. He rolled a huge rag into a tube, lay down with his stomach in the water, and pushed it from the entrance back towards the bathroom. You loon, why are you pushing it all through the apartment? Grumbled Darya Petrovna. Pour it into the sink. Forget the sink, Sharikov replied, trying to catch the murky water with his arms. It will crawl out onto the front stairs. With a creak, a bench rolled out of the corridor with Philip Filipovich in blue striped socks stretched out on it, balancing himself. Ivan Arnoldovich, stop answering. Go to the bedroom. I'll give you slippers. It's all right, Philip Filipovich, it's nothing. Get galoshes then. Really, it's all right. My feet are wet anyway. Oh my God, said Philip Filipovich bleakly. What a vicious animal. Sharikov grumbled suddenly and came out squatting with a soup bowl in his hand. Bormental slammed the door and gave in to laughter. Philip Filipovich's nostrils flared and his glasses glinted. You are speaking of whom? He asked Sharikov from on high. Permit me to know. I'm talking about the cat. What a bastard, Sharikov replied, eyes wandering. You know Sharikov? Philip Filipovich responded after a deep breath. I have positively never seen a more brazen creature than you. Bormental giggled. You, Philip Filipovich continued, are obnoxious. How dare you say that? You are the cause of all this and yet you dare. No, the devil knows what this is. Sharikov, tell me, please, Bormental asked. How much longer are you going to chase cats? Shame on you. It's outrageous, you know. Savage. I'm no savage. Sharikov responded grumpily. No savage at all. It's impossible to allow him in the apartment. He just looks for something to swipe. He gobbled up Darya's ground meat. I wanted to teach him a lesson. You need to be taught a lesson, replied Philip Filipovich. Just look at your mug in the mirror. Almost lost an eye? Sharikov responded firmly, touching his eye with a black, wet hand. When the parquet floor, so soaked it was black, had dried a bit and all the mirrors bore a steam bath sheen, and the doorbell had stopped ringing, Philip Filipovich stood in the entrance wearing red leather slippers. This is for you, Fyodor. I thank you humbly. Change your clothes immediately. But wait. Have Darya Petrovna give you some vodka. I thank you humbly. Fyodor shuffled his feet and then said, There's something else, Philip Filipovich. I apologize, I feel guilty. But there's the glass in apartment 7. Citizen Sharikov threw rocks. At a cat? Asked Philip Filipovich, darkening like a cloud. As if, at the apartment owner. He's threatening to go to court. Damn! Sharikov embraced their cook, and the master started to chase him out. Well, they got into it. Please, always tell me about such things right away. How much do you need? 1.5. Philip Filipovich fished out 3 shiny 50-kopeck coins and handed them to Fyodor. Having to shell out that much on account of that bastard, came the low voice from the doorway. It's all his dash. Philip Filipovich turned, bit his lip, and silently pushed Sharikov into the reception room and locked him in. Sharikov instantly started banging his fists on the door. Don't you dare! Philip Filipovich cried in a sickly voice. Well, that's really something, Fyodor noted meaningfully. I've never seen anyone so obnoxious in my life. Bormental appeared out of nowhere. Philip Filipovich, I beg you, stay calm. The energetic Asclepius unlocked the door to the reception room, and they could hear his voice coming from there. What's the matter with you? Do you think you're in a tavern or something? That's the way, Fyodor added enthusiastically. That's it. And box his ear too. Now, Fyodor, Philip Filipovich muttered sadly. Believe me, I feel sorry for you, Philip Filipovich. Chapter 7. No, and no. Bormental began insistently. Please tuck it in. Really, what? Honest to God, grumbled Sharikov. Thank you, doctor, Philip Filipovich said gently. I've got tired of correcting him. I won't let you eat until you tuck it in. Zina, receive the mayonnaise from Sharikov. What do you mean, receive? Sharikov was upset. I'll tuck it in now. With his left hand he blocked the dish from Zina, and with his right he shoved a napkin inside his collar, coming to resemble someone at the barber's. Use the fork, please, Bormental added. Sharikov gave a long sigh and started fishing for pieces of sturgeon in the thick sauce. A little more vodka? He announced interrogatively. Haven't you had enough? Bormental inquired. You've been hitting the vodka too much lately. Do you begrudge it? Sharikov inquired and looked up from beneath his brow. That's silly, Philip Filipovich interjected severely, but Bormental interrupted him. Don't worry, Philip Filipovich, I'll handle it. You, Sharikov, speak nonsense, and the most outlandish thing is that you say it with aplomb and confidence. Of course, I don't begrudge the vodka, especially since it's not even mine but Philip Filipovich's. It's just that it's harmful. That's one, and two, you behave improperly as it is without it. Bormental pointed to the taped-up buffet. Zina, dear, please give me some more fish. Sharikov reached for the decanter in the meantime, and with a sidelong glance at Bormental, poured himself a shot. You must offer it to others, said Bormental. And in this way, first to Philip Filipovich, then to me, and finally for yourself. A barely visible satirical smile touched Sharikov's lips, and he filled all the shot glasses. We have to do everything like on parade, he said. Napkin here, tie there, and, excuse me, and please, merci, instead of doing it for real. We're tormenting ourselves the way they did under the Tsarist regime. And what is, for real, may I inquire? Sharikov did not respond to Philip Filipovich, instead raising his glass and saying, Here's wishing that everything dash. And the same to you, Bormental replied with some irony. Sharikov sloshed the vodka down his throat, frowned, brought a piece of bread to his nose, sniffed it and then swallowed it, his eyes brimming with tears. A stage, Philip Filipovich suddenly said curtly and as if in a trance. Bormental glanced at him in amazement. Sorry, a stage, repeated Philip Filipovich and shook his head bitterly. There's nothing to be done about it. Klim. Bormental peered with extreme interest into Philip Filipovich's eyes. Do you suppose so, Philip Filipovich? No supposing about it. I'm certain. Could it began Bormental and stopped, glancing over at Sharikov. The latter frowned suspiciously. "Spader," said Philip Filipovich softly. "Gut," replied his assistant. Zina brought in the turkey. Bormental poured some red wine for Philip Filipovich and offered it to Sharikov. "I don't want any. I'd rather have some vodka." His face looked greasy. Sweat beaded his brow, and he was cheerful. Philip Filipovich also grew kinder after his wine. His eyes were clearer and he regarded Sharikov, whose black head sat in the napkin like a fly in sour cream, with greater condescension. Bormental, feeling stronger, revealed a tendency towards action. "Well, and what shall we undertake this evening?" he inquired of Sharikov. He blinked and replied, "We'll go to the circus, that's the best." "The circus every day?" Philip Filipovich remarked rather genially. "That's rather boring, it seems to me. If I were you, I'd go to the theater at least once." "I won't go to the theater," Sharikov said with hostility and made the sign of the cross over his mouth. "Hiccuping at the table spoils the appetite of others," Bormental informed him automatically. "Please forgive me. Why, actually, don't you like the theater?" Sharikov looked into his empty shot glass as if it were binoculars, thought, and pouted. "It's tomfoolery, talk and talk. Nothing but counter-revolution." Philip Filipovich threw himself against the Gothic chair back and laughed so hard that gold palings sparkled in his mouth. Bormental merely shook his head. "You should read something," he proposed. "Otherwise, I'm reading and reading as it is," Sharikov replied and suddenly poured himself half a glass of vodka swiftly, like a predator. "Zina," Philip Filipovich called anxiously. "Take the vodka away, child. We don't need any more. What are you reading?" He had a sudden picture flash through his mind. An uninhabited island, a palm tree, and a man in an animal skin and hat. "You should read Robinson that Wachtkalit correspondence between Engels and that, what's his name, damn it, and Kautsky." Bormental's fork with a piece of white meat stopped halfway, and Philip Filipovich spilt his wine. Sharikov managed to down his vodka in the meantime. Philip Filipovich rested his elbows on the table, looked at Sharikov and asked, "Permit me to inquire what you can say in connection with your reading." Sharikov shrugged. "I don't agree." "With whom? Engels or Kautsky?" "Both of them," Sharikov replied. "Marvelous, I swear to God. All who say another. And what would you propose instead?" "What's there to propose? They keep writing and writing. Congress, some Germans. Makes my head ache. Just take everything and divide it up." "Just as I thought," exclaimed Philip Filipovich, smacking the tablecloth with his hand. "That's just what I thought." "Do you know the method as well?" Bormental asked, intrigued. "What method?" Sharikov had become more talkative under the influence of the vodka. "It's no secret. Look now. One is spread out over 7 rooms, with 40 pairs of pants, while another forages, looking for food in rubbish bins. The 7 rooms is a dig at me. I take it?" Philip Filipovich asked, narrowing his eyes haughtily. Sharikov huddled into himself and said nothing. "Well, all right, I'm not against sharing. Doctor, how many patients did you turn away yesterday?" 39 people, Bormental replied instantly. "HM, 390 rubles. Well, let the men bear the damage. We won't count the ladies Zina and Darya Petrovna. Your share, Sharikov, is 130 rubles. Please hand it over." "A fine thing," replied Sharikov in a fright. "What's all this?" "For the tap and the cat," barked Philip Filipovich, losing his state of ironic calm. "Philip Filipovich," Bormental exclaimed anxiously. "Wait, for the outrage you created, which made us cancel office hours. It is unacceptable. A man leaping around the apartment, like a savage, tearing off taps. Who killed Madame Polisuker's cat? Who dash? You, Sharikov. The other day you bit a lady on the stairs," attacked Bormental. "You stand dash," growled Philip Filipovich. "She smacked me on the face," screeched Sharikov. "My mug isn't public property." "Because you pinched her breast?" shouted Bormental. knocking over his wine glass. You stand, You stand on the lowest step of development. Philip Filipovich outshouted him. You are a creature still in formation, weak mentally, all your actions are purely animal, and you, in the presence of two people with a university education, permit yourself with totally unbearable aplomb to offer advice of cosmic scale and equally cosmic stupidity on dividing everything up, and at the same time you gobbled up the tooth powder. The other day, Bormental confirmed. So now, thundered Philip Filipovich, I will rub your nose in this. By the way, why did you wipe off the zinc oxide from it? You will be silent and listen to what you are told. Learn and try to become at least a minimally acceptable member of society. By the way, what scoundrel outfitted you with that book? You think everyone's a scoundrel? Sharikov replied fearfully, overwhelmed by the two-sided attack. I can guess, exclaimed Philip Filipovich, wrathfully turning red. Well, all right then. Well, it was Schwander. He's not a scoundrel. For my development I can see how you're developing after Kautsky, Philip Filipovich shrieked, turning yellow. He furiously pushed the button on the wall. Today's incident shows that better than anything. Zina! Zina! Yelled Bormental. Zina! Screamed frightened Sharikov. Zina ran in pale. Zina, in the reception room. Is it in the reception room? In the reception, Sharikov replied docilely. Green like vitriol. A green book . He's going to fire off now. Sharikov exclaimed in despair. It's not mine, it's from the library. The correspondence is called. What's his name? Engels with that devil. Into the stove with it. Zina turned and flew out. I would hang that Schwander from the nearest tree, upon my word, Philip Filipovich exclaimed, furiously clamping his teeth into a turkey wing. This incomparable rotten creature exists in the building like a boil. It's not enough that he writes libelous nonsense in the papers. Sharikov squinted angrily and ironically at the professor. Philip Filipovich in turn glared narrowly at him and stopped talking. Oh, nothing good will come of us here in the apartment, Bormental suddenly thought prophetically. Zina brought in a round tray holding a baba, reddish on the right side and rosy on the left, and the coffee pot. I won't eat that, Sharikov announced in a threatening and hostile way. No one's asking you to. Behave yourself. Doctor, please. The dinner ended in silence. Sharikov pulled a crumpled paparosa from his pocket and lit up. Finishing his coffee, Philip Filipovich looked at his watch, pressed the chimes, and they tenderly played 8:15. Philip Filipovich leant back on the Gothic chair, as was his habit, and reached for the newspaper on the side table. Doctor, please, take him to the circus. But, for God's sake, check the program. Are there any cats? How can they let that kind of riff-raff into the circus? Sharikov noted grimly, shaking his head. They let all sorts in, Philip Filipovich replied ambiguously. What are they playing? At Solomonovsky's, Bormental started reading. There are 4 of these Yussums and some kind of spinning man. What are Yussums? Philip Filipovich inquired suspiciously. God knows. I've never seen the word before. Well, then, you'd better see what Nikitin has. Everything must be clear. Nikitin. Elephants and the extreme of human agility. Sue, what do you have to say regarding elephants, dear Sharikov? Philip Filipovich asked Sharikov doubtfully. He was offended. What you think I don't understand is that it. Cats are different, but elephants are useful animals, Sharikov replied. Fine then. If they're useful, then go and see them. You must obey Ivan Arnoldovich. And do not get into any conversations at the buffet. Ivan Arnoldovich, I humbly entreat you not to offer beer to Sharikov. 10 minutes later, Ivan Arnoldovich and Sharikov, dressed in a duckbill cap and thick woolen overcoat with the collar turned up, left for the circus. It grew quiet in the apartment. Philip Filipovich appeared in his study. He lit the lamp under the heavy green hood, which made the enormous study very peaceful, and started pacing the room. The cigar tip burned long and hot with a pale green fire. The professor tucked his hands into his trouser pockets, and a heavy thought tormented his learned brow with its widow's peak. He smacked his lips, hummed, "To the sacred banks of the Nile," and muttered something. At last, he set the cigar in the ashtray, went over to the cupboard that was completely made of glass, and illuminated the entire study with 3 powerful lights from the ceiling. From the third glass shelf in the cupboard, Philip Filipovich removed a narrow jar and examined it, frowning, holding it up to the light. In the transparent and viscous liquid there floated, without sinking to the bottom, a small white lump, excised from the depths of Sharikov's brain. Shrugging, twisting his lips and hemming, Philip Filipovich devoured it with his eyes, as if trying to find in the white, unsinkable lump the cause of the astonishing events that had turned life upside down in the apartment on Prechistenka. It is quite possible that the scholarly man did find it. At least, having regarded to his content the appendage of the brain, he put away the jar, locked the cupboard, placed the key in his vest pocket and collapsed, tucking his head into his shoulders and sticking his hands deep into his jacket pocket, onto the leather of the couch. He burned a second cigar for a long time, chewing up its tip, and finally, in total solitude, colored green like a gray-haired Faust, he exclaimed, "I swear to God, I think I'll do it." No one responded. All sounds had ceased in the apartment. Traffic stops in Obakov Lane at 11, as you know. Once in a grate while the distant footsteps of a late pedestrian could be heard, thumping somewhere beyond the drapes, and then dying away. The pocket watch chimes rang gently beneath Philip Filipovich's fingers in his pocket. The professor waited impatiently for Dr. Bormental and Sharikov to return from the circus. Chapter 8. It's not known what Philip Filipovich had decided to do. He did not undertake anything special in the course of the week, and perhaps, in consequence of his inaction, everyday life in the apartment was overwhelmingly eventful. About 6 days after the business with the water and the cat, the young man who turned out to be a woman from the Bildcom came to Sharikov and handed him documents, which Sharikov immediately placed in his jacket pocket and just as immediately afterwards called Dr. Bormental. "Bormental. Oh no, you use my name and patronymic with me." "Please," replied Bormental, face contorted. It should be noted that in those 6 days the surgeon managed to argue some 8 times with his charge, and the atmosphere was sticky in the rooms on Obakov Lane. "Then you use my name and patronymic," Sharikov replied quite reasonably. "No," thundered Philip Filipovich in the doorway. "I will not permit you to be called by that name and patronymic. If you prefer not to be called familiarly as Sharikov, then Dr. Bormental and I will call you Mr. Sharikov." "I'm not a mister. The misters are all in Paris," barked Sharikov. "Schwander's work," shouted Philip Filipovich. "Well, fine then, I'll deal with that scoundrel. There will be nothing but misters in my apartment as long as I live here. Otherwise, either you or I will leave here, and most likely that will be you. Today I will place an advertisement in the papers, and believe me, I'll find you a room. Right, like I'm stupid enough to move from here," Sharikov replied very clearly. "What?" demanded Philip Filipovich, and his face changed so much that Bormental rushed over and tenderly and anxiously took him by the sleeve. "Don't you take liberties, Monsieur Sharikov." Bormental's voice was raised very high. Sharikov stepped back, pulled 3 papers from his pocket, green, yellow, and white, and jabbing his fingers at them, said, "There, I'm a member of the Residents' Association, and I'm assigned 35 square feet of space in apartment number 5 of the responsible renter Preobrazinski." Sharikov thought and added an expression that Bormental mechanically noted as new. "Be so kind." Philip Filipovich bit his lip and carelessly muttered through it, "I swear that I will end up shooting that Schwander." Sharikov took those words extremely attentively and acutely, as was apparent from his eyes. "Philip Filipovich, vorsichtig." Bormental began to caution him. "Really, that's too. To stoop so low," exclaimed Philip Filipovich in Russian. "Bear in mind, Sharikov, mister, that if you permit yourself one more obnoxious statement, I will deprive you of dinner and any board at all in my house. 35 feet is delightful, but those froggish papers don't oblige me to feed you, do they?" Sharikov was frightened and opened his mouth. "I can't stay without board," he muttered. "Where will I get grub?" "Then behave yourself decently," Both Asclepiuses howled as one. Sharikov was significantly subdued and that day caused no harm to anyone except himself. Using Bormentel's brief absence, he appropriated his razor and ripped open his cheekbone so that Philip Filipovich and Dr. Bormentel had to give him stitches, which made Sharikov howl for a long time, weeping copiously. The next night, two men sat in the professor's study in the dim green light, Philip Filipovich and his loyal and devoted Bormentel. Everyone else was asleep. Philip Filipovich wore his azure robe and red slippers and Bormentel was in shirt sleeves with blue suspenders. Between the doctors, the round table held a thick album, a bottle of brandy, a plate of lemon slices and a cigar box. The scientists, having filled the room with smoke, were heatedly discussing the latest events. That evening Sharikov had stolen 2 10-ruble notes lying under a paperweight from Philip Filipovich's study, vanished from the apartment, returned late and completely drunk. More than that, he came back with 2 unknown characters who made noise on the front stairs and expressed their desire to spend the night as Sharikov's guests. The signified characters left only when Fyodor, who was present at this scene in his autumn coat thrown over his underwear, called the 45th police station. The characters left the moment Fyodor hung up. With their departure, the malachite ashtray from the mirror shelf in the entrance, Philip Filipovich's beaver hat and his walking stick inscribed in gold with, "To dear and esteemed Philip Filipovich from his grateful orderlies on the day," followed by the Roman numeral XXV, went missing somewhere. "Who are they?" Philip Filipovich threatened Sharikov, making fists, swaying and sticking to the fur coats. He muttered that he did not know those characters and that they weren't some sons of bitches but good fellows. The most amazing part is that they were both drunk. How did they manage? Wondered Philip Filipovich, regarding the spot on the stand where once stood the memorial of his anniversary. "Specialists," explained Fyodor, heading back to bed with a ruble in his pocket. Sharikov categorically and stubbornly denied the 2 10-ruble notes and said something unclear about the fact that, he's not the only one in the apartment. "Aha, perhaps it was Dr. Bormentel who swiped the money?" inquired Philip Filipovich in a voice quiet yet terrible in its tone. Sharikov reeled, opened his completely owlish eyes and offered a suggestion. "Maybe Zinka took it." "What?" screamed Zina, appearing in the doorway like a ghost, covering the unbuttoned blouse on her chest with her palms. "How dare he dash?" Philip Filipovich's neck turned red. "Easy, Zanusha," he said, extending a hand towards her. "Don't worry, we will take care of all this." Zina immediately started wailing, blubbering, and her hand jumped up and down on her collarbone. "Zina, shame on you. Who could possibly think that?" "Pfui, how vile," Bormentel said in confusion. "Really, Zina, you're stupid. God forgive me," Philip Filipovich began. But Zina's weeping stopped of its own accord and everyone stopped talking. Sharikov was feeling sick. Hitting his head on the wall, he emitted a sound, not quite, like a. His face paled and his jaw worked convulsively. The bucket from the examining room for the scoundrel. Everyone ran around, taking care of the sick Sharikov. When they took him to bed, he stumbled in Bormentel's arms and cursed very delicately and melodically with swear words, pronouncing them with difficulty. This whole business had occurred around 1 o'clock, and now it was around 3, but the 2 men in the study were wide awake, agitated by the brandy. They had smoked so much that the smoke moved in thick, slow layers without any swaying. Dr. Bormentel, pale, with a very determined gaze, raised a glass with a wasp waist. "Philip Filipovich," he exclaimed emotionally, "I'll never forget how I came to you, a half-starved student, and you sheltered me in the faculty. Believe me, Philip Filipovich, you are much more to me than my teacher, my professor, my unlimited respect for you. Permit me to kiss you, dear Philip Filipovich." "Yes, my dear fellow, my—" Philip Filipovich muttered in bewilderment and rose to meet him. Bormentel embraced him and kissed him in his fluffy, heavily smoky mustache. "I swear to God, Philip Fili-dash. I'm so touched, so touched." "Thank you," Philip Filipovich said. "My dear fellow, I sometimes shout at you during surgery. Do forgive an old man's irritability. Essentially, I am so alone. From Seville to Granada." Philip Filipovich, you should be ashamed, exclaimed fiery Bormental sincerely. If you do not wish to offend me, do not speak to me in that manner. Well, thank you, to the sacred banks of the Nile. Thank you, and I've come to love you as a talented physician. Philip Filipovich, I'm telling you, Bormental cried passionately, leapt from his chair, shut the door leading to the corridor more tightly, and continued in a whisper when he returned. It's the only way. I don't dare give you advice, of course, but Philip Filipovich, look at yourself, you're completely exhausted. You can't work anymore. Absolutely impossible. Philip Filipovich confirmed with a sigh. There, it's just unthinkable, whispered Bormental. The last time you said that you were worried for me, and if you only knew how much that touched me, dear professor. But I'm not a boy and I understand myself how terribly it might turn out. But I profoundly believe that there is no other way. Philip Filipovich rose, waved his arms at him and exclaimed, Don't tempt me. Don't even say it. The professor paced the room, setting off smoky waves. I won't even listen. You realize what will happen if we're discovered. We won't get off because class origins are taken into account, despite a previous conviction. We don't have the right origins, do we, dear boy? Not in the least. My father was a judicial investigator in Vilno. Bormental replied bitterly, finishing his cognac. There, that won't do. It's a bad heredity. Can't even think of anything more disgusting. Actually, my mistake, mine's even worse. My father was an archpriest in a cathedral. Merci. From Seville to Granada in the quiet twilight. Damn it all! Philip Filipovich, you are a luminary of world significance. And over some son of a bitch, pardon the expression. They wouldn't dare touch you. Believe me. All the more reason why I won't do it. Philip Filipovich responded thoughtfully, stopping and looking at the glass cupboard. Why not? Because you aren't a luminary of world significance. Far from it. Exactly. But abandoning a colleague in case of catastrophe while getting out of it myself using my world significance. Sorry. I am a Moscow student, not a Sharikov. Philip Filipovich proudly straightened his shoulders and looked like an ancient French king. Philip Filipovich, ah! Bormental exclaimed bitterly. Then what now? Put up with it? You're going to wait until we manage to turn that hooligan into a man. Ivan Arnoldovich, in your opinion, do I understand a little in the anatomy and physiology of, say, the apparatus of the human brain? What do you think? Philip Filipovich, how can you ask? Bormental replied with great feeling and opened his arms. Fine then, without false modesty. I also think that I'm not the last person in that area in Moscow. I think that you are the first, and not only in Moscow, but in London and Oxford too. Bormental interrupted fiercely. Fine, so be it. But then listen, future Professor Bormental. No one can do it. No need to ask. Just use me as a reference. Tell them Preobrazhensky said so. Venita. Klim. Philip Filipovich suddenly exclaimed triumphantly, and the cupboard responded with ringing pains. Klim, he repeated. Here's the thing, Bormental, you're the best student in my school and besides that my friend, as I have become convinced today. So I am telling you a secret as a friend, of course I know that you will not shame me. How the old-ass Preobrazhensky screwed up this operation like a third-year student. Of course, there was the discovery, you know that for yourself. And here Philip Filipovich pointed bitterly with both hands at the window shade, apparently indicating Moscow. But just bear in mind, Ivan Arnoldovich, that the only result of this discovery will be that now we all will have that Sharikov up to here. Preobrazhensky patted himself on his bent neck, which had a tendency towards paralysis. Don't worry. If someone, Philip Filipovich continued voluptuously, were to lay me down and give me a whipping, I swear I would pay him 50 rubles. From Seville to Granada. Damn me. I spent 5 years digging out appendages from brains. Do you know what kind of work I did? It's mind-boggling. And now I ask for what? So that one fine day I could turn a sweet dog into scum that makes your hair stand on end. Something exceptional. I don't agree at all. This is what happens, doctor, when a researcher doesn't feel his way in parallel with nature but forces the issue and raises the curtain. Here, have your Sharikov and eat him with buckwheat. Philip Filipovich, what if it had been Spinoza's brain? Yes, barked Philip Filipovich. Yes, if only the miserable dog doesn't die under the knife, and you've seen what sort of operation it is. In other words, I, Philip Preobrazhensky, have never done anything harder in my life. One can transplant Spinoza's pituitary or that of some other supernatural creature and create from a dog something extremely high on the scale. But what the devil for, I ask. Explain to me, please, why we need to artificially fabricate Spinozas, when any peasant woman can give birth to one whenever. After all, Mrs. Lomonosov gave birth to her famous son in Kolmogorye. Doctor, humanity takes care of this itself, and in the evolutionary process, stubbornly separating out from the mass of all kinds of scum, it creates dozens of outstanding geniuses who ornament the globe. Now you see, Doctor, why I denigrated your conclusion in Sharikov's case history. My discovery, may the devils take it, which you think is so wonderful, isn't worth a plugged kopeck. Don't argue, Ivan Arnoldovich, I've figured it out. I never waste my breath, you know that perfectly well. Theoretically, it is interesting, yes. Physiologists will be delighted. Moscow is in an uproar. But practically, what do we have? Whom do you see before you? Preobrazhensky pointed in the direction of the examining room, where Sharikov slept. An exceptional rascal. But who is he? Klim, shouted the professor. Klim Chugunkin. Bormental's mouth fell open. Here's what that is. 2 convictions, alcoholism, divide up everything, my hat and 20 rubles missing. Here Philip Filipovich recalled his anniversary walking stick and turned red. A lout and a pig. Well, I'll find that stick. In other words, the pituitary gland is a closed chamber that determines a person's given character. Given. From Seville to Granada. Philip Filipovich shouted, eyes rolling furiously. And not generally human. It is the brain itself in miniature. I don't need it at all, the hell with it. I was concerned with something completely different. Eugenics, improving the human race. And I came across rejuvenation. Do you really think that I regenerate them for the money? I am a scientist, after all. You are a great scientist, so there, said Bormental, gulping brandy. His eyes were bloodshot. I wanted to do a small experiment after I first extracted sex hormone from the pituitary 2 years ago. And instead of that, what has happened? Oh my God! All those hormones in the pituitary. Oh Lord, Doctor, I am facing a dead end of hopelessness. I swear I am lost. Bormental suddenly rolled up his sleeves and said, squinting at his nose. Then here's the thing, dear teacher, if you do not wish to do it, I will feed him arsenic at my own risk. The hell with the fact that my father was a judicial investigator. After all, it's your own experimental creature. Philip Filipovich calmed down, weakened, collapsed into his chair and said, No, I will not permit it, dear boy. I am 60 years old. I can give you advice. Never commit a crime, no matter against whom. Live to an old age with clean hands. But my goodness, Philip Filipovich, if that Schwander works on him some more, think what he'll turn into? God. I'm only beginning to realize what that Sharikov could become. Aha! Now you understand? I realized it 10 days after the operation. But see here, Schwander is the greatest fool of all. He doesn't realize that Sharikov is a much graver threat to him than to me. Right now, he's trying everything to pit him against me, without realizing that if someone decides to pit Sharikov against Schwander, there will be nothing left of him but his horns and hooves. Just think of the cats. A man with a dog's heart. Oh, no. Philip Filipovich drew out his words. You are making an enormous mistake. Doctor, for God's sake, don't calumny the dog. The cats are just temporary. It's a question of discipline and 2 or 3 more weeks. I assure you, in a month or so he'll stop attacking them. But why not now? Ivan Arnoldovich, it's elementary, are you really asking? The pituitary isn't going to just hang in the air. It's grafted onto a dog's brain, after all. Give it time to take. Sharikov is now manifesting only the remnants of the canine. And don't forget that the cats are the best of what he's been doing. You must realize that the true horror is that he no longer has a dog's heart but a human one. the worst of all of those that exist in nature. Agitated to the extreme, Bormental tightened his strong, thin hands into fists, straightened his shoulders, and stated firmly, "It's over. I'll kill him. I forbid it." Philip Filipovich was categorical. "Please dash." Philip Filipovich looked up warily, raising his finger. "Wait, I heard footsteps." They both listened, but it was quiet in the corridor. "I imagined it," said Philip Filipovich and spoke heatedly in German. The Russian word criminality sounded several times in his speech. "Just a minute," Bormental suddenly said and stepped towards the door. Steps could be heard clearly moving toward the study. In addition, a voice mumbled. Bormental flung open the doors and jumped back in astonishment. Completely stunned, Philip Filipovich froze in his chair. In the illuminated rectangle of the hallway, Darya Petrovna in just her nightgown stood with a militant and blazing face. The doctor and the professor were blinded by the abundance of the powerful and, as it seemed to the startled men, completely naked body. With her mighty arms, Darya Petrovna was dragging something, and that something resisted, sitting on its rear, and its small legs, covered with black fluff, struggled on the floor. The something was of course Sharikov, completely lost, still tipsy, disheveled and in his night shirt. Darya Petrovna, magnificent and naked, shook Sharikov like a sack of potatoes and said these words, "Take a look, Professor Sir, at our visitor Telegrafovich. I've been married, but Zina is an innocent girl. It's a good thing that I woke up." Finishing this speech, Darya Petrovna fell into a state of shame, cried out, covered her bosom with her hands and rushed away. "Darya Petrovna, forgive me, for heaven's sake!" Red-faced Philip Filipovich, rousing himself, called after her. Bormental rolled his shirt sleeves higher and moved on Sharikov. Philip Filipovich, seeing his eyes, was horrified. "Doctor, I forbid it." Bormental grabbed Sharikov by the back of his shirt with his right hand and shook him so hard that the fabric on the back cracked and a button from the neck in front broke off. Philip Filipovich tried to head him off and began pulling scrawny Sharikov out of the tenacious surgical hands. "You don't have the right to fight," half-stifled Sharikov shouted, sitting down on the floor and sobering up. "Doctor!" screamed Philip Filipovich. Bormental came to his senses a bit and released Sharikov, who immediately started sobbing. "Fine then," hissed Bormental. "We'll wait until morning. I'll throw him a special benefit performance when he sobers up." Then he grabbed Sharikov under his arms and dragged him to the reception room to sleep. Sharikov made an attempt to kick him away, but his legs would not obey. Philip Filipovich spread his feet, thus separating the azure skirts of his robe, raised his arms and eyes to the ceiling lamp in the corridor and said, "Well, well, well." Chapter 9. The special performance for Sharikov promised by Dr. Bormental did not take place, however, the next morning because Polygrafovich had vanished from the house. Bormental was infuriated and despairing, called himself an ass for not hiding the key to the front door, shouted that this was unforgivable, and ended with the hope that Sharikov would be hit by a bus. Philip Filipovich sat in his study, hands in his hair, saying, "I can just imagine what will happen on the street. I can imagine. From Seville to Granada. Oh my God. He might still be in the Buildcom office." Bormental raged and ran off somewhere. At the office he got into such an argument with Chairman Schwander that the latter sat down to write a complaint to the People's Court of Komovnichesky district, shouting that he was not the keeper of Professor Preobrazhensky's ward, especially since that ward polygraph no later than last night proved to be a fraud who took 7 rubles from the committee allegedly to buy textbooks at the co-op store. Fyodor, who had made 3 rubles on this incident, searched the house from top to bottom. There was no trace of Sharikov. The only thing they learnt was that Polygraph had left at dawn wearing cap, scarf and coat, taking a bottle of Ashbury vodka from the buffet, Dr. Bormental's gloves and all his documents. Darya Petrovna and Zina did not conceal their turbulent joy and hoped that Sharikov would never return. Sharikov had borrowed 3 rubles and 50 kopecks from Darya Petrovna the day before. "Serves you right," roared Philip Filipovich, brandishing his fists. The telephone rang all day, and the telephone rang the next day. The doctors saw an unusual number of patients, and on the third day the question arose firmly in the study about informing the police, who would have to find Sharikov in the whirlpool that was Moscow. No sooner was the word police pronounced than the reverential quiet of Obakov Alley was sundered by the barking of a truck, and the windows of the house shook. Then came a confident peal of the bell, and Polygraph Polygrafovich appeared in the entrance. Both the professor and the doctor came out to meet him. Polygraph entered with extraordinary dignity, removed his cap in total silence, hung his coat on the coat rack and stood before them in a new guise. He wore a second-hand leather jacket, worn leather pants and tall English boots that laced to the knee. Preobrazhensky and Bormental, as if given a command, crossed their arms on their chests and stood in the doorway, awaiting the first announcement from Polygraph Polygrafovich. He smoothed his bristly hair, coughed and looked around, showing that Polygraph wanted to hide his embarrassment by over-familiarity. "I, Philip Filipovich," he began at last, "have taken a position." Both doctors made a vague dry sound in the throat and stirred. Preobrazhensky was first to rouse himself, and he reached out and said, "Give me the paper." It read, "The bearer Comrade Polygraph Polygrafovich Sharikov is indeed head of the subdepartment for control of Moscow's stray animals, cats and so on, in the Department of Moscow Communal Administration." "So," said Philip Filipovich heavily, "who found you the job?" "Ah, actually, I can guess." "Well, Schwander," replied Sharikov. "Permit me to inquire why you give off that disgusting reek?" Sharikov worriedly sniffed his jacket. "Well, what can I do? It smells. Obviously. From my speciality. Yesterday we killed cats." Philip Filipovich shuddered and looked at Bormental. His eyes were like two black pistol barrels pointed directly at Sharikov. Without any preamble, he moved towards Sharikov and easily and confidently took him by the throat. "Help!" Sharikov squeaked, turning pale. "Doctor, I won't do anything bad. Philip Filipovich, don't worry." Bormental replied in a steely voice and then shouted, "Zina and Darya Petrovna!" They appeared in the entrance. "Repeat after me," said Bormental and pushed Sharikov's throat slightly towards the fur coat. "Forgive me." "All right, I'm repeating." Sharikov, completely vanquished, replied in a hoarse voice, and then suddenly took a deep breath, jerked away and tried to shout, "Help!" But the shout did not come out and his head was completely engulfed by the coat. "Doctor, I beg you." Sharikov nodded to show that he was submitting and would repeat. "Forgive me, esteemed Darya Petrovna and Zina Ida Dash. Prokofyevna," Zina whispered in fright. "Prokofyevna," Sharikov said hoarsely, gasping for air, "that I permitted myself. Permitted. Vile behavior at night in a state of intoxication. Intoxication. I will never do it again. Will any dash. Let him go. Let him go. Ivan Arnoldovich." Both women entreated simultaneously. "You'll choke him." Bormental released Sharikov and said, "Is the truck waiting for you?" "No," Polygraph replied respectfully. "It just brought me here." "Zina, tell the car to leave. Now bear this in mind. You have returned to Philip Filipovich's apartment. Where else could I go?" Sharikov replied meekly, eyes darting. "Fine. Keep quiet. Lie low. Otherwise, you will have me to deal with for every outrageous act." "Understood." "Understood," Sharikov replied. Philip Filipovich had said nothing during the violence on Sharikov. He had huddled pathetically near the door lintel and chewed on his nail, gaze directed at the floor. Then he looked up at Sharikov and asked, softly and mechanically, "What do you do with those killed cats?" "They'll go to make coats," Sharikov said. "They'll turn into squirrel, for worker credit." Thereupon, silence descended upon the apartment and continued for 2 days. Polygraph Polygrafovich left in the morning by truck, returned in the evening, dined quietly in the company of Philip Filipovich and Bormental. Despite the fact that Bormental and Sharikov slept in the same room, the reception, they did not speak to each other, and Bormental was first to tire of it. About 2 days later, a thin young lady wearing eyeliner and cream stockings appeared in the apartment and was truly overwhelmed by its opulence. In her shabby coat, she followed Sharikov and bumped into the professor in the entrance. He stopped, stunned, squinted and asked, "May I be informed? I'm registering marriage with her. She's our typist. She'll live with me. Bormental will have to move out of the reception room. He has his own apartment," Sharikov explained with extreme hostility and grumpiness. Philip Filipovich blinked, thought as he regarded the red-faced young lady, and spoke to her very courteously. "I'll ask you to come into my study for a minute." "I'll go with her," Sharikov said quickly and suspiciously. The decisive Bormental popped up instantly, as if from under the floor. "Excuse me," he said. "The professor will chat with the lady, and you and I will wait here." "I don't want to," Sharikov replied angrily, trying to follow the young lady, burning with shame and Philip Filipovich. "No, sorry." Bormental took Sharikov by the arm and they went to the examining room. For about 5 minutes, no sounds were heard from the study, and then suddenly came the muffled sound of the young lady's weeping. Philip Filipovich stood by his desk, and the young lady cried into a dirty lace hanky. "He said, the louse, that he was wounded in combat," the young lady sobbed. "He's lying," Philip Filipovich replied intransigently. He shook his head and continued, "I feel sincere sympathy for you, but really you can't just go off with the first person you meet, just for the sake of your job. Child, it's outrageous. Now here." He opened a desk drawer and took out 3 30-ruble notes. "I'll get food poisoning," the young lady wept. "The canteen serves salt beef every day. He threatened me, says he's a Red commander. With me, he says, you'll live in a luxurious apartment. Pineapple every day. My psyche is kind, he says, it's only cats I hate. He took my ring for a keepsake. Well, 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 a kind psyche. From Seville to Granada," muttered Philip Filipovich. "You'll get over this, you're so young. Was it really in this very alley? Come on, take money when it's offered, a loan," snapped Philip Filipovich. Then the doors were opened ceremoniously, and Bormental, at Philip Filipovich's signal, brought in Sharikov. His eyes darted around, and the pelt on his head bristled like a brush. "Scoundrel," said the young lady, flashing her puffy, smeared eyes and stripy powdered nose. "Do explain to this lady why you have a scar on your forehead," Philip Filipovich asked ingratiatingly. Sharikov bet the house. "I was wounded at the front fighting Kolchak," he barked. The young lady stood and left with a loud cry. "Stop!" Philip Filipovich called after her. "Wait! The ring," he said to Sharikov. He obediently removed the hollow ring with an emerald. "All right now," he said angrily to her. "You're in for it now. Tomorrow I'll arrange to have you fired. Don't be afraid of him," Bormental shouted after her. "I won't let him do anything." He turned and gave Sharikov a look that made him back away and bang his head on the cupboard. "What's her surname?" Bormental asked him. "Her name!" he screamed, suddenly looking savage and terrifying. "Vasnetsova," replied Sharikov, looking around for an escape route. "Every day," Bormental said, holding the lapel of Sharikov's jacket. "I will personally inquire about staff reductions, whether Citizen Vasnetsova has been fired, and if I find out that she's been fired, I will shoot you with my own hands that very moment. Watch it, Sharikov. I'm speaking to you in plain Russian." Sharikov stared at Bormental's nose. "We'll find our own revolvers," Polygraph muttered, but very weakly, and then suddenly twisted away and shot out the door. "Watch it!" Bormental's cry caught up with him. That night and half the next day, silence hung in the air like a cloud before a storm. But everyone was silent. But the next day, when Polygraphovich, who had felt a bad premonition that morning, left gloomily for work in the truck, Professor Preobrazinski, at a totally unofficial time, saw one of his previous patients, a fat and tall man in military uniform. He had insisted on an appointment and got it. Entering the study, he clicked his heels politely. "Have your pains returned, dear fellow?" asked the haggard Philip Filipovich. "Sit down, please." "Merci." "No, Professor," his visitor replied, placing his helmet at the corner of the desk. "I'm very grateful to you. I'm here for something else." Philip Filipovich, With my great respect, HM. To warn you, this blatant nonsense. He's just a scoundrel. The patient dug into his briefcase and took out a piece of paper. It's a good thing they reported it to me directly. Philip Filipovich saddled his nose with pince-nez over his glasses and started reading. He muttered to himself for a long time, his face changing expression every second. And also threatened to kill chairman of the Bildcom Comrade Schwander, which shows that he has firearms. And he makes counter-revolutionary speeches and even ordered his social servant Zinaida Prokofyevna Bonina to burn Engels in the stove, as a blatant Menshevik with his assistant Ivan Arnoldovich Bormental, who without being registered lives secretly in his apartment. I certify the signature of head of the Animal Control Subdepartment P. Sharikov, chairman of Bildcom Schwander, Secretary Pastrukin. May I keep this? Asked Philip Filipovich, all blotchy. Or, forgive me, perhaps you need this to set legal machinery in action? Excuse me, Professor, said the patient in great offense, nostrils flaring. You really do have a very scornful view of us. And here he started puffing up like a turkey cock. Forgive me, dear fellow, muttered Philip Filipovich. Forgive me, truly I did not wish to insult you. We know how to read papers. Philip Filipovich. Dear fellow, don't be angry, he's driven me to distraction. I can imagine, the patient said, completely calm again. But what scum he is. I'd be curious to see him. There are all sorts of legends going around Moscow about you. Philip Filipovich merely waved off the suggestion in despair. And here the patient saw that the professor had grown stooped and even seemed to have turned gray over recent months. The crime ripened and fell like a stone, as it usually happens. With a festering feeling in his heart, Polygraphovich returned in the truck. Philip Filipovich's voice called him into the examining room. Surprised, Sharikov entered and with a vague fear looked at the gun barrels on Bormental's face and then at Philip Filipovich. A dark cloud circled the assistant and his left hand, holding a cigarette, trembled on the shiny arm of the obstetric chair. Philip Filipovich said with very nasty calm, Gather up your things now, trousers, coat, everything you need, and get out of the apartment. What do you mean? Sharikov was truly surprised. Get out today, Philip Filipovich repeated in a monotone, squinting at his fingernails. Some evil spirit had entered Polygraphovich. Apparently disaster was waiting for him and fate was behind his back. He threw himself into the embrace of the inevitable and barked angrily and curtly. What is this, really? Do you think I won't find a way to deal with you? I'm sitting on 35 feet here and I'm staying. Get out of the apartment, Philip Filipovich whispered with feeling. Sharikov invited his death. He raised his left hand and made a rude gesture with his bitten and cat-stinking finger at Philip Filipovich. And then with his right hand, addressed to the dangerous Bormental, he took a revolver from his pocket. Bormental's paparosa dropped like a falling star and a few seconds later, Philip Filipovich, horrified and jumping over broken glass, was rushing between the cupboard and the couch. There, prostrate and gasping, lay the head of the Animal Control Subdepartment, and on his chest was the surgeon Bormental, smothering him with a small white pillow. A few minutes later, Dr. Bormental, his face unrecognizable, went to the front door and put up a sign next to the bell. No patients today because the professor is ill. Please do not disturb by ringing the bell. He used his shiny penknife to cut through the bell's wires, and then he examined his scratched, bloody face and his torn hands, jittering with a rapid tremor, in the mirror. Then he appeared in the kitchen doorway and in a cautious voice said to Zina and Darya Petrovna, The professor asks that you do not leave the apartment. All right, replied Zina and Darya Petrovna meekly. Allow me to lock the back door and take the key, said Bormental, hiding in the shadows behind the door and covering his face with his hand. It's temporary, and not out of lack of trust in you. But if someone comes, you won't be able to resist and you'll open up, and we can't be disturbed. We're busy. All right, the women replied and immediately turned pale. Bormental locked the back door, locked the front door, locked the door from the corridor to the entrance, and then his steps vanished near the examining room. Silence covered the apartment, crept into all the corners. Twilight crawled in, nasty, wary. In a word, gloom. Of course, later the neighbors across the courtyard maintained that allegedly all the lights were on in Preobrazhensky's examining room windows, which open on the yard, and that they even saw the professor's white cap. Checking this is difficult. Of course, even Zina, when it was all over, gabbed that in the study by the fireplace, after Bormental and the professor left the examining room, Ivan Arnoldovich had scared her to death. Allegedly, he was crouched in the study by the fire burning his own notebook with the blue cover out of the pile in which he kept the case histories of the professor's patients. The doctor's face was allegedly completely green and really completely scratched to bits. And Philip Filipovich that night was not himself. And also, however, it's also possible that the naive girl from the apartment on Prechestenka is lying. But one thing is definitely true. That night the apartment was filled with total and terrible quiet. Epilogue. Exactly 10 nights after the battle in the examining room in the apartment of Professor Preobrazhensky, which is located in Obakov Alley, the bell rang sharply. Criminal police and investigator. Please open up. Steps sounded, rang out, started to enter, and lots of people ended up in the entrance, sparkling with lights and newly glassed in cupboards. 2 in police uniform, 1 in a black coat with a briefcase, gloating and pale Chairman Schwander, the youth who was a girl, the doorman Fyodor, Zina, Daria Petrovna, and half-dressed Bormental, shyly covering his tieless throat. The door from the study let Philip Filipovich pass through. He came in his azure robe, known to all, and everyone could see right away that Philip Filipovich had put back on a lot of weight in the past week. The former imperious and energetic Philip Filipovich, full of dignity, stood before his nocturnal guests and apologized for his robe. "Don't be discomfited, Professor," replied the man in civilian dress in great embarrassment, then hummed and hawed and spoke again. "It's very unpleasant. We have an order to search your apartment and an—" The man looked at Philip Filipovich's mustache and finished up, "an arrest warrant, depending on the results." Philip Filipovich narrowed his eyes and asked, "And on what charges, may I ask, and whom?" The man scratched his cheek and started to read from a paper in briefcase. Charging Preobrazhensky, Bormental, Zinaida Banina, and Daria Ivanova with the murder of the head of Animal Control Subdepartment of the Department of Moscow Communal Administration, Polygrafovich Sharikov. Zina's sobs covered up the last of his words. There was a movement. "I don't understand a thing," Philip Filipovich replied, majestically rolling his shoulders. "Who is this Sharikov?" "Ah, sorry, you mean my dog. The one on which I operated." "Excuse me, Professor, not a dog. But when he was already a man. That's the issue." "You mean, because he spoke?" Philip Filipovich asked. "That doesn't mean being human. Of course, it's not important. Sharik is alive, and certainly no one killed him." "Professor," said the man in black in great surprise, raising his eyebrows, "then you will have to produce him. It's 10 days since he went missing, and the facts, forgive me, look very bad. Dr. Bormental, be so kind as to produce Sharik for the investigator," commanded Philip Filipovich, taking the arrest warrant in hand. Dr. Bormental grinned crookedly and left. When he returned and whistled, a dog of strange quality ran in after him through the study door. Some spots were bare, some spots had regrown fur. He came out like a trained circus animal on his hind legs, then got down on all fours and looked around. Deadly silence congealed in the entrance, like jelly. The nightmarish dog, with a crimson scar on his forehead, got back up on his hind legs, smiled, and sat in a chair. The second policeman crossed himself with sweeping gestures, and as he moved back stepped on both of Zina's feet. The man in black, without shutting his mouth, managed to say, "How can this be? He worked in the control." "I didn't appoint him there," replied Philip Filipovich. "Mr. Schwander gave him the recommendation, if I'm not mistaken." "I don't understand," the man in black said in bewilderment and turned to the first policeman. "Is that him?" "Him," the policeman replied soundlessly. "Him all right. The very one," Fyodor's voice spoke out. "But the bastard is overgrown again. And he spoke? Cough, cough. He speaks even now, but less and less. So take advantage of the moment before he stops completely. But why? The man in black inquired softly. Philip Filipovich shrugged. Science does not yet know ways to turn animals into people. I tried but unsuccessfully, as you see. He spoke for a while and then started turning back into his original state. Atavism. Don't use rude words. The dog barked from the chair and got up. The man in black suddenly turned pale, dropped his briefcase, and began to fall sideways. The policeman caught him on the side and Fyodor from behind. A bustle ensued and 3 voices were clearly audible. Philip Filipovich. Valerian. He's fainted. Dr. Bormental. I will personally throw Schwander down the stairs if he ever shows up in Professor Preobrazinski's apartment. And Schwander, make sure that's on the record. The pipes played their gray harmonies. The drapes hid the thick Prechestenka night with its lone star. The highest creature, the important canine philanthropist, sat in an armchair, while the dog Sharik flopped on the rug by the leather couch. The March fog gave the dog headaches in the morning, the pain circling along the seam on his head. But by evening the warmth made them pass. And now it was getting better and better, and pliant and warm thoughts flowed in the dog's head. I was so lucky, he thought, dozing off, indescribably lucky. I've established myself in this apartment. I'm definitely sure that something's off in my origins. That Newfoundland is to blame. My grandmother was a slut. May she rest in peace, the old thing. Of course, they've sliced up my head for some reason, but that will heal in time. There's nothing for us to look at there. In the distance, flasks tinkled softly. The bitten one was tidying the cupboards in the examining room. The gray-haired magician was sitting and singing, "To the sacred banks of the Nile." The dog had seen terrible things. The important man plunged his hands wearing slippery gloves into a vessel, taking out brains. The stubborn man persisted, always seeking, cutting, examining, squinting and singing. To the sacred banks of the Nile.